Season 4, Episode 1. For all debts public and private. Well, I had to pay a lot in royalties for the Mr. Rogers bit last video. Let's check my bank account and see how much I can scrape together. Oh. Season 4 kicks off with Carm reading some boring newspaper article to AJ while Tony walks out to grab his own newspaper, as is routine with these season openers.
Hello? Yeah, she's here.
Oh my god, Will Arnett was in this? Lego Batman picks up a call from FBI gal Deborah's mom while Deborah tries to calm down their stupid fat baby. And Carm criticizes AJ for not reading newspaper articles dropped by at their house for social studies at his new school. And AJ tries deflecting the criticism onto his parents before Tony nearly smashes AJ's face into his Fruit Loops. Chris makes a surprise appearance into the household as Carm asks where Furio is. And Chris complains to Tony about having to do incredibly difficult and labor-intensive tasks for Tony, like sitting on his ass and driving him to the doctors. And Tony tells Chris to shut up and changes the conversation how much Chris's father meant to him. Deb and Lego Batman's stupid baby finally shuts up as Tony meets with Junior at the doctor's, where Junior complains about his upcoming trial and how it's costing him a pretty penny. And while Junior tries making a case for Tony to try and send some extra cash his way, saying that Tony's been selfishly taking advantage of Junior's legal and health troubles for a hot minute now, Tony declares himself guilty of not giving a fuck as Junior storms out of the doctor's office despite not getting a checkup. Carm spots Angie Bob and Sierra working at the grocery store and sneakily walks backwards as to not catch any diseases from the pores. And Deb and Adriana eat Chinese food as Chris shows up early with a bunch of expensive looking bags. And Deborah suspiciously looks over at them and tries asking Chris where he got them before Chris tells her to eat ass and leave. Chris attempts to take the edge off of a hard day of Tony being mean to him with his trusty friend Heroin, complaining to Adriana about the incident from last season when Chris argued with Tony over Jackie Jr., along with him bringing up Chris's father earlier so that he can keep making negative comparisons between the two. Adriana criticizes Chris for his heroin addiction as Chris proclaims that he can quit whenever he wants, asking Adriana when has he never been there 100% mentally as he shoots up heroin and passes out. Meanwhile, Tony makes himself a bowl of ice cream and watches some TV. And Carm has a talk with Tony, saying that she's worried about the less than average income Tony's bringing in and how she doesn't want to wind up like some poor person should Tony ever suddenly pass away. She tells Tony about Angie at the supermarket and continues expressing her concerns about what her and the kids would do without Tony. And Tony says that the family is set in perpetuity. And complains to Carmelo about how he just wanted to chill out for 3 seconds.
Jesus Christ, Carmelo, I've been busting my pick all day long to bring home the money you're so concerned about. And I thought maybe I could have a Sunday and zone out in front of the friggin' TV. Because, A, you're right, my job is extremely stressful.
They continue haggling over cash as Carm pitches the idea of investing money into stocks while Tony says that the money stays where it is. And Carm warns Tony that everything comes to an end as we cut to the next day, where Tony angrily criticizes Georgie for wasting ice and that the Bing isn't making as much cash as normal. And Georgie very stupidly tries telling Tony that bad ice dilutes the drinks before getting his shit rocked.
Hey, throw it all away there.
Waste it all, fucking John D. Rockefeller. Waste it all.
You know what? I'm starting another counter. This happens so many times that I can't take it anymore. Tony, Chris, and Sylvia walk over the river and through the woods to the abandoned garage they go, with Tony demanding to know why money is lower than normal and forcing the crew to start cracking skulls to get their cash, saying that Junior needs the money for his upcoming legal battle. The next day, AJ eats a slice of pizza like a psychopath while Tony takes a secret boatload of cash and hides it under a tile, and finds out that Rosalie and Ralphie are coming over for dinner to celebrate Rose's birthday as well as distract her from the death of this generation's greatest philosopher, Jackie Jr. Ralphie tells a story to the family about how he raced this dude on the highway as Janice laughed way too hard at it. And Carm's father talks about his time in the war before Adriana shows up with undercover Deborah. We get a slightly tense moment where Deb shakes Tony's hand while Ralphie snorts some coke in the bathroom. And Janice flirtatiously barges in and mooches off of Ralphie's stash. We get yet another moment of adultery between two characters in this specific bathroom as Ralphie and Janice start smooching on each other, with Tony looking over suspiciously at Janice and Ralphie's empty seats at the table. Tony later buys some bird seed and a bird feeder from a pet store with a definitely real sign, and has coffee with Assemblyman Zellman as he shares Tony info about the Esplanade construction site, saying that prices near the project are predicted to skyrocket. Tony remembers that Junior once bought an abandoned warehouse in Newark, which he figures can make him him a shit ton of cash. And we cut to another doctor's office visit with Junior, where Junior officially promotes Bobby for his hard work. Tony later hides his other money in birdseed, and Carm notes that it's a bit late in the season for ducks as Tony says, nuh-uh. Man, we're half an hour to this episode and I'm starting to feel withdrawal effects from something. My hands are getting all clammy, but I have no idea why. Oh yeah, Paulie! Paulie beats this prisoner to the punch to call Johnny Sack, where Johnny reveals Tony and Silvio's apathy toward Paulie as he says that they only mentioned Paulie doing time in passing, which depresses Paulie. He tells Johnny that he's still in prison, not for the funeral bus thingy from last season, but rather for a BS gun charge.
Long story short, they find a piece under the seat. Fucking 38.
Dude, Paulie's head in this scene is so weird. You can see his scalp peeking through his hair. Tony tells Carm that he's gotta work late tonight as he meets with a crew to mess around with some ladies. And Carmine gives Tony some very sound advice before leaving.
One other thing, though. John said he went to a cookout at your house.
Yeah.
Don doesn't wear shorts.
Fun fact about this little line of dialogue, according to Michael Imperioli, after The Sopranos first began airing on television, James Gandolfini received a call from an anonymous number in the middle of the night, and the man on the other line refused to identify himself, only telling Gandolfini one thing. Listen, you're a great actor, we like what you're doing, but you gotta know one thing. A Don never wears shorts. Right after saying this, the anonymous man hung up the phone and never contacted Gandolfini again. The call allegedly disturbed Gandolfini greatly, which, hey, gotta say, I don't blame him. And the line was repurposed into the show as a tribute to whatever mafioso contacted Gandolfini that night to correct their egregious error. Chris smokes some heroin with this lady before Tony rudely interrupts the session and says they gotta get a move on while Ralphie lays down on the couch naked. Chris claims that Tony's got a hate boner for him as Tony tells Chris where to fool around. And Murph, the guy who was demoted earlier to make way for Bobby, tells Junior the very unfortunate news from Junior's lawyer that the FBI has had an undercover agent in the doctor's office since January, which causes Junior to have a heart attack and die. Chris and Tony pull over close to a Hooters, and Tony informs Chris that a man named Barry Haydu, the man who killed Chris's father, is in that building right now, celebrating his retirement from the police force. He tells Chris the story of why his father was murdered, saying that a gangster named Jilly killed Dickie's cellmate in prison, so in return, Dickie violently took out one of Jilly's eyes, with Tony noting Dickie's loyalty. He tells Chris that Haydu later killed Dickie outside of his home for what he had done to Jilly, and says that the only reason he's alive now is because he was very useful for the crew, but that those days are now over. He hands Haydu's address over to Chris and walks out to Bobby's car, leaving Chris to his own devices. Haydu arrives back to the house to unwind after a nice retirement party. Haydu wakes up handcuffed to the stairs as Chris has one of his first real badass ore farming moments of the show, as he intimidates the shit out of Haydu and telling him that Dickie Moltisanti was his father. During this, Bobby and Tony have dinner at Not Hooters, where they talk about Bobby's newfound responsibilities as a capo, as well as how his family is coping with the death of Bobby's father, as Bobby delivers one of the most iconic lines from the entire Sopranos franchise.
You know, Quasimodo predicted all this.
Who did what?
All these problems, the Middle East, the end of the world.
Nostradamus. Quasimodo's the hunchback of Notre Dame.
All right.
I have seen this line quoted in my comment section more times than I've drank water. Haydu continues telling Chris not to kill him, claiming that he has no idea who or what Chris is talking about. But Chris is still dead set on making sure that Haydu is set dead as he turns up the TV set to muffle the noise.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What are you gonna do?
Chris sets up the scene as if Haydu committed suicide as he steals the money from his wallet, only able to obtain a measly $20, and kicks Haydu's lifeless body as Carm watches a news piece about two men tied to the mob who died in the robbery, stressing her the hell out as she hopes that Tony isn't reaching the end of the line himself. We're introduced to Bobby's wife and kids as Junior complains about the undercover agent in the doctor's office, with Junior suspecting that it was the woman he was hitting on earlier. Tony tries rationalizing and says that she probably only reported on small things and scolds Junior for thinking with his dick instead of his brain. He kicks Bobby and Murph out of the room and pretends to do a favor for Junior by offering to take the abandoned warehouse off of his hands for $100K, which will end up making Tony infinitely more money and screwing Junior over once more. And Junior says fine whatever as he criticizes himself for falling for the hot lady's hook, line, and sinker, as well as his old age getting the better of him, which makes Tony feel guilty, though probably not much. We're finally given our first Melfi session of the season, where Tony tells Melfi that he's gotten depressed while Melfi was on vacation. He tells her about how things in life are all good, except when it comes to discussing money and the future with Carmela. telling Melfi about her previous rants and how, while he agrees with her, he doesn't want to delve into where he gets his money and how he earns it and whatnot. He also mentions that Junior snapped the fear of growing older from the previous scene in the focus, saying that guys like him either end up dead or in the can unless they rely only on the support of their blood relatives. Though not naming any names for obvious mob reasons, Tony tells Melfi about how Dickie lived in Florida for many years using this approach, and tells Melfi about how Chris has gotten himself together recently, saying that he's begun the process of permanently strengthening Chris's bond with himself, which is, as we saw earlier, allowing Chris to Inigo Montoya, the man who killed his father. Melfi asks Tony why he's being more frank than usual, and Tony admits that he doesn't know, only saying that he feels comfortable talking with Melfi. In the final scene of the episode, Chris surprises his mother at her house as he looks at old baby photos of his father while smoking cigarettes, and asks her if she can make him a fluffernutter, or a type of peanut butter sandwich. He also asks her if she ever misses Dickie, and she bluntly responds by asking if she ever remarried, which Chris doesn't respond to. Chris's mother is unable to make any fluffernutters due to not having any peanut butter, and while she offers French toast, Chris says that he has to leave, but before he does, he sticks the $20 bill he took from Haydu onto the fridge, and leaves the place satisfied as the show zooms in on the bill before fading to black, ending the episode. Just kidding. For whatever reason, this episode actually lingers on this shot of the $20 bill while the credits roll. Another case of the Sopranos using a specific film technique for exactly one episode and never doing it again, like with a cold open back in 46 Long. Anyways, this episode was pretty good. The one thing that I found weird about this episode is that it doesn't really feel like a season opener. It feels more like we were dropped in a random episode in the middle of the season. You could certainly say that the openers from seasons 1 and 2 felt like season openers, with the former being the introduction to our cast of characters and the latter containing a long opening montage showing where the characters are now. And you could also make that case about season 3's opener, as that episode was deliberately paced uniquely to reintroduce us to all of our characters. This episode, on the other hand, is just like, fuck it, it's a regular episode, good luck. Ironically, this episode had the highest number of viewers watching of the whole show, so haha, bad timing. This episode contains some pretty obvious themes of financial issues and worries about the future, which makes a lot of sense in my opinion. This was the first episode to air after the attacks on September 11th, and the show references this event a handful of times throughout this episode, as well as the season. Using the first episode of the season seems like a good starting point to tackle these issues that millions of Americans at the time were also facing, which I'm assuming is why they took a different approach to the beginning of the season compared to the other season openers. The show also discusses the recession in the economy a couple of times, explaining the money troubles Tony and his crew face in this episode. The contents of the episode are solid, with my favorite aspect being Chris finally getting a super cool, awesome moment as he says, "My name is Christopher Moltisanti. You killed my father. Prepare to die." Bang. Over the course of rewatching this show, I've become a lot more fond of all the business talk that all the mafiosos have. The way that everyone almost speaks in riddles and metaphors as they conduct business is fantastic, and the attention to detail is on point. It never feels like you're just being spoon-fed obvious information. It's delivered in an entertaining and fascinating way. To kick off season 4, I'm feeling a nice beat here. Season 4, episode 2. No Show. Lego Batman and Deb get their dumb baby to calm down as Adriana calls their place, saying she got some spot certificates from her cousin, and Carm critiques Meadow for not getting a job before school since they bought her a car specifically for her to do that. And they get into an argument over Meadow not doing well at school as Meadow justifies it by saying that she read like 3 books. She also mentions Jackie's death as a cause for this before one of Meadow's friends mentions a guy with a ponytail outside the house, and Carm quickly prepares herself before greeting Furio inside. Furio says that he's thinking about buying a house in New Jersey before Tony comes down and kidnaps him from Carm. And we cut to a dinner with the crew, where Ralphie finds a way to sneak in a fat joke about Ginny.
Of course, it gives the other kids, the 98-pound weaklings, some hope.
Oh, speaking of 98 pounds, I hear Jenny Sachs getting a 95-pound mold taken off her ass.
Hey, some guy's wife. Come on.
I hope you found that joke funny because this one sentence is going to result in half the fucking conflict this season. A bunch of the guys leave dinner as Patsy and this guy Little Paulie have an arranged sit down on the Paulie we all know and love's behalf, requesting Ralphie for a change in the amount of no show and no work jobs at the Esplanade construction site. They eventually settle on 5 jobs, 2 no shows and 3 no works, with Paulie getting the first no show and Chris getting the second. And Silvio makes the surprising announcement that Chris will be taking Paulie's place as acting capo while he's in jail, which excites little old Chrissy. Adriana talks with Danielle at the Crazy Horse, who says to Adriana that she'd love to have a baby one day, and also tells Adriana about a boyfriend she once had who she believed had ties with the mob and is like, haha, do you think your boyfriend's in the mafia, winky face? And Adriana says that she wants to confess something personal, which perks Danielle's attention. However, instead of admitting that Chris is a mafia guy, she tells Danielle that her doctor believes that she won't be able to hold a pregnancy in the future due to complications from an abortion that she had years ago, and that she hasn't told anybody else about this, including Chris. Speaking of which, Chris walks into the place with little Polly, handing over little baggies of cocaine right in front of Danielle. And Danielle leaves as Chris informs Adriana of the news about his recent temporary promotion, as well as gives a gift for Adriana to celebrate. Janice and Ralphie finger each other while watching TV as Tony comes a knocking at the door, and Ralphie quickly rushes upstairs as Tony comes inside and roasts Bobby for literally no reason.
On the corner of Bacalaos. Figured I'd come by, say hello.
Good. How's he doing?
He's fat.
As Janice is about to offer Tony a glass of shitty soy milk, however, Tony spots a shoe belonging to Ralphie under the table, and angrily walks out of the house as Ralphie soils his britches upstairs. Little Polly visits Big Polly in prison, telling him that the sit-down was a success in obtaining the jobs, along with the fact that Tony's making big bucks with a warehouse he acquired from Junior last episode. Little Polly also makes the extremely questionable move of telling Polly the joke Ralphie made at dinner about Ginny and her mole, a joke that Polly does not find funny at all. Chris drives up to the construction site to flex the fact that he doesn't have to show up to get paid unlike the rest of the crew. And he obtains a payment from Little Polly, as well as learns about fiber optic cables and the money that can be earned from them, which piques Chris's interest. Tony complains to Melfi about Meadow not getting a job or an internship this summer due to several issues, including Jackie's death last season, saying that he believes that Meadow's only using him as an excuse to get out of doing any work, since Jackie was an asshole to her when he was alive. However, Melfi points out that that doesn't mean the pain of Jackie's death doesn't still affect her, and asks Tony if most of her anger is put on Carmelo rather than him. And Tony says that he's hit with it occasionally, but that he knows that she still loves him. Melfi pitches the idea of having Meadow meet with a psychologist, as the show cuts to Meadow loafing around in bed, with Carmela telling her to get her ass up and register for classes. However, Meadow drops the bombshell on Carm that she's going to be taking a gap year in order to tour around Europe with her friend Misty, saying that she's not ready for college yet and that she figured that Carm didn't want her around the house anyway, which Carm says is not the case as Meadow ignores her. The conflict between Chris and Tony continues as Tony reprimands Chris for stealing a bunch of fiber optic cables from the construction site for cash, saying that he doesn't want any unwanted eyes on the Esplanade project. Ralphie and Vito play basketball while discussing Ralphie hooking up with Janice, with Ralphie talking about the effects that it could have on his mafia career as he steals the ball from Vito and causes him to get dunked on. Carm looks at an investment website containing info about bonds and mutual funds and stuff, a callback to her suggestion to Tony from last episode, as she informs Tony that Meadow's gonna be going on a trip to Europe, which predictably upsets Tony. Carm tells Tony to stop yelling as she yells at AJ to fuck off back to his room, and suggests to Tony that Meadow see the therapist that Melfi recommended him, which Tony refuses, saying that she can just see one at college.
One beer left?
Chris complains to Adriana once again about Tony being an ass to him, and does what he did last episode and fixes the issue with heroin, swearing to Adriana that he's done with it afterwards and that he can quit anytime he wants to and that he's not addicted and that he's okay. Adriana talks about something Danielle told her before Chris cuts her off and says that something is up with that girl, saying that because Adriana met her at the mall out of the blue, doesn't like Little Polly, and is very suspiciously dressed. She's, say it with me folks, a lesbian, that's right. The next day, Chris tries way too hard settling into his capo position by wearing this insane outfit and repeating Tony's $250 million job quote from earlier.
Use your head, huh? It's a $250 million job.
By drawing heat to a $250 million job? Use your fucking head, Christopher.
Trying to pin the blame for the fiber optic cable issue on the Patsy and Little Polly. And while Patsy points out that Chris had that look in his eye when it was brought up to him, Chris is like, couldn't be me, as the show cuts to Tony and Carm talking with Meadow. While her parents say that going to Europe is a risky decision, money and safety wise, Meadow says that she keeps seeing images of Jackie Jr. laying in a pool of his own blood. And the guilt that Tony feels over the whole situation begins to overwhelm him as Meadow says this, with Meadow and Carm's voices becoming distant and echoey before Tony suddenly shoots up and says, fuck it, do whatever you want, stupid. Carm criticizes Tony for this, as Tony says that she's only gonna want to go to Europe more if they deny her wishes, and that she can meet an Italian boy during her trip in order to get her mind off of Jackie. Someone like Furio, which Carm agrees with since she really wants to get fucked by Furio, I mean because she respects him as a friend. Carm says fine, whatever, but have her talk to someone first. And we cut to Meadow's meeting with a psychologist, psychologist, where she tells her about how Jackie's funeral made her feel like garbage, calling Junior singing an egregious saccharine ballad, and admits that she threw up after she left the place. The psychologist asks about what occupation her father has, with Meadow claiming that he's a loan shark and not a mafia member, interestingly denying the existence of the mafia, and says that Tony tried his best to keep Jackie in line and keep him out of dealing drugs, despite believing last season that Jackie couldn't have been killed dealing drugs and suspecting higher powers were at play. The psychologist says that she wants to ask Meadow a very important question about her father, and Meadow braces for impact, fearing the worst.
Did Dad ever molest you?
Nope, I wasn't expecting that either. The psychologist encourages Meadow to go to college when she feels like she's ready, saying that Tony and Carm should figure out their own needs and supposed self-esteem issues. And Silvio tells Tony that he believes that Patsy feels bad that he was passed over as temporary capo for Chris.
I'm just saying, with the change of rank and all, maybe he feels marginalized.
Marginalized? What the fuck does that even mean?
That's what it means. Danielle meets with Adriana and Chris up in the club, and Chris sits with them on a couch in the back while proposing the idea of starting a Grammy award-winning rap group. Him and Adriana start kissing as Chris grabs Danielle's thigh, and Adriana quickly notices this as Danielle bum rushes the hell out of there.
Use your head, huh? What do I want with that skank when I got you?
You were saying she had a nice ass.
I was trying to say something positive because she's your friend.
Chris and Adriana get into an argument as Chris claims that she came on to him, saying that Danielle is trying to mess up their relationship and that nothing could break apart what they have, as Adriana cries in his arms and apologizes. Haha, let's see how well that ages. Patsy tells Silvio about some fancy new tiles at the construction site, but says that Tony is told through Chris and his god-awful attire that they can't be jacket anymore shit. Despite this, however, Silvio gives him the okay to do so, and Tony walks down to see Janice at the kitchen counter. He once again asks Janice why the fuck she's going out with Ralphie, stating that the last time she tried to hook up with a mob guy, it didn't end well. But Janice defends her decision and says that Tony is just acting like a jerk while Tony remains firm on his stance, saying that Ralphie is no good. Adriana calls Deborah, telling her to never meet or contact her again, with Deborah complaining to Lego Batman that 4 months of work just went down the shitter. And Deborah informs the FBI guys about Adriana thinking that she tried to seduce Chris, and Harris and Chief Frank go, fuck it, just bring her in. Jack Massarone complains to Tony at the golf course that somebody hijacked a bunch of floor tiles, and Chris storms over to the construction site and starts yelling at Patsy, nearly blowing his brains out in the process. Patsy yells at Chris, mocking him and saying that Silvio was the one who gave the order. And Chris says that he's the capo and that he's still pissed at Patsy for looking through Adriana's underwear drawer despite Paulie being the one who did that. One of the actual construction guys is like, oh gee willikers, we gotta call the cops. And Patsy lashes out at the guy and knocks him unconscious with a metal pipe. In one of the best scenes of the episode, Carm tells Meadow to hang up the phone and asks about her recent meeting, with Meadow saying that she doesn't have to say anything. And Tony joins the convo as Meadow claims that her therapist said that it's her right to go to Europe, which isn't really accurate to what she said, but okay. Tony asks for more details, not before accidentally sitting on a gross dirty bowl left over by Meadow, and Meadow says that the therapist said that she could attend Barcelona if she wanted, which pisses off Tony. Meadow gets up and claims that she's 19 now, and that means she can do whatever she wants. But Carm points out that just getting what you want is for babies, not grown-ups, which, gotta say, good point. Meadow also mentions that the therapist says she should be on Prozac as Tony tries making a compromise, saying that she should just wait till next year to start school again without the whole Europe thing, despite earlier telling Meadow that she can go fuck off to Europe if she wants.
You were all in favor of me going.
Your mother doesn't want it.
Wow. Listen to Mr. Mob Boss.
Oh shit. All of the guilt that Tony felt for Jackie Jr.'s downfall comes out during this scene, as he tells Meadow that he tried his damnedest to protect and keep Jackie Jr. from messing up and getting into trouble. And while Meadow says that she's sick of Tony not talking honestly with her, Tony simply goes, try me, which causes the room to fall into silence.
I made my plans. I'm going to Europe and I'm getting the fuck out of here.
You've been told no!
Watch me.
Don't do it! I'm warning you, do not do it!
As amazing and serious as this scene is, that ending line is so funny. He's yelling, don't do it, like she's literally about to board the plane to Europe right this second. While all of this is going down, Adriana is busy walking little Cassette around the place, when all of a sudden, Harris and Deborah pull up next to her, demanding her to get into the car. They inform Adriana that she's facing up to 25 years in prison for possession and intent to distribute cocaine. And Adriana gets angry at Deborah, saying that she told her personal secrets that she never would have told anyone and asking if her name is even Danielle. They say that they don't want her to wear a wire, but rather just obtain information, and says that she's gonna have a hard time explaining to Tony why she brought an undercover agent to his house and that her and Chris will likely end up dead. Nope, not showing that. Silvio enters from the pearly white portal and notes that Tony looks awful, And Tony says that he couldn't sleep since Meadow hasn't been seen in a hot minute. And Silvio states that the whole deal with the floor tiles was just a misunderstanding. However, Tony notes that Chris said that Silvio was the one who gave the okay, and speculates that Silvio's acting out since he feels usurped by Chris getting the capo role before Silvio, but allows the situation to be chalked up to a misunderstanding, saying that Silvio can keep the cash they earned.
Should be about $2,000 there. I'll have the rest for you later.
I know you will.
Ralphie and Janice continue hanging out while Meadow finally starts registering for her classes, including one class called Morality, Self, and Society. And Carm and Tony talk while Carm takes a bath, saying that she believes that Meadow has put most of the blame on her, but doesn't elaborate on what she means by this when Tony asks for details as the show fades to black, ending the episode. I personally think that Carm feels guilty for this whole situation because of how she essentially taught Meadow to just ignore it, or pretend not to acknowledge and repress her own feelings toward Tony's actions. We saw a bit of this in the season 3 finale with the conversations that Meadow and Carm had with each other leading up to Jackie Jr.'s funeral, where Carm got very defensive and stated that Meadow was only trying to find boogeymen to blame when hypothesizing that Jackie was killed by a fellow mafia member, along with a conversation in the car, where Meadow implies that Jackie was allowed into the mafia and was given no care or guidance by the people around him as Carm goes, "I'm glad you see," brushing off the undertones of Meadow's statement and pretending as if Jackie really was secretly a drug dealer or what have you. This, combined with a brutal reality check she received from Dr. Krakauer last season, is likely what's making Carm feel this way, as Meadow ultimately ended up going along with the charade. As we saw with her conversation with Kelly in the season 3 finale, along with her implying that her father was only a loan shark in this episode. The guilt that Carm feels for herself and her children continues to eat away at her, even months after the fact. That's my personal interpretation anyway. Overall, this episode was alright. Nothing too crazy in this episode, apart from the amazing confrontation with Meadow, Tony, and Carm, along with Adriana puking her guts out after getting busted by the FBI. One weird recurring thing I noticed in this episode is that there were a significant amount of fake out moments, where you think one of the characters is gonna say something super dramatic and revealing, only for it to be something else entirely. First, you think Adriana's gonna admit that Chris is a mafioso to Danielle, only for her to reveal her inability to maintain a pregnancy. Then there's Chris describing his suspicions with Danielle that make you think he's gonna be like, "It's an FBI gal, Adriana, run!" Only for him to think that she's gay. And then you got that moment where you think the psychologist is going to ask Meadow for details about Tony's criminal life, only for her to hit Meadow with the molestation question. Either I'm crazy or Terrence Winter and David Chase were in the writer's room giggling like schoolgirls while making this. The Adriana stuff in this episode was pretty great, and it was fun watching Chris attempt to go full mafioso throughout. Other than one or two great scenes though, this episode is fine. I'm feeling a high C tier for this episode. Season 4, Episode 3. Christopher. Woke up this morning, got yourself a gun. The Soprano crew hangs around the pork store as Bobby reads an article from the newspaper, saying that a Native American rights group is planning to protest a local Columbus Day parade due to Christopher Columbus becoming far less revered in recent times. Yep, that's what this entire episode is going to revolve around, and it's gonna suck. Predictably, most of the crew thinks this is ridiculous, with Silvio going as far as to call it anti-Italian discrimination. Though Chris points out that he did kill a lot of Native Americans, while Furio says he doesn't like Columbus due to cultural differences down in Italy. Silvio says he's gonna take action, while Carm and the other mob wives plan to attend a church luncheon themed around Italian-American pride in women. And they talk about Furio and how attractive he looks, though Adriana says he should lose the ponytail.
Sandy Fortunato says it looks like a dick coming out of his head.
Well, she pretends to be his friend. What a two-face.
Wow, that must have cut deep for Adriana. Man, being forced to work for the government against your loved ones has gotta suck.
Like you worked that ass.
Why is it always Janice? Ralphie cuts off their very kinky game of Battleship to pick up a call from Rosalie, telling her he'll be back home soon. And Paulie calls Johnny Sack, deciding to take revenge on Ralphie for his smart ass in this by leaking the Ginny Sack fat joke to Johnny. Johnny later discusses business with the crew over dinner and acts noticeably more hostile to Ralphie, and also asks Tony about the abandoned warehouse that he bought off Junior, saying, "Hey, we're sharing the Esplanade, give us a taste." And Tony says they'll figure out a deal soon. Furio and Carm share some very suspicious glances with each other as they both eat a nice breakfast. And Furio shows her pictures of his new home while a piece debating the ethics of celebrating Columbus Day plays on the TV. And Tony comes down in a ho-hum mood, anxious about the start of Junior's RICO trial, as it's the first Soprano family trial in a decade and a half. Junior's trial officially commences while Junior complains to his lawyer about his fees, and Carm and the mob wives attend the luncheon, where the speaker encourages the folks to speak against Italian stereotypes, including the ones about being affiliated with the mob, which makes Carm and the rest of the mob wives noticeably uncomfortable. The mob wives are like, "That was so unfair. Come on, can't I just enjoy my marriage with my psychopath murdering husband in peace?" And Carmela says that everyone's entitled to their own opinions, while Gabriella says that she's gonna rip Father Phil a new asshole for letting the speaker say that. Gabriella gets to asshole asshole-ripping time, claiming to be speaking for Carmela since she's one of the church's biggest supporters, while also being like, it hurt my feelings too. The protest mentioned at the beginning of the episode takes place as Silvio and other members of the crew, and also Artie, pull up to protest the protest. The entire thing erupts into complete chaos as the Native American group starts fighting with the Soprano crew and also Artie. And Patsy tries climbing up a pole to take down an effigy of Columbus, while Silvio says that they gotta go. Though not before little Polly gets hit in the head with a glass bottle, and Artie hilariously locks himself in the car after a slushie gets thrown at him. Patsy gets arrested and the crew gets a move on, while the Native Americans continue yelling at them. And Karen says that she's going to the dentist to get a crown in. Bobby gets a call from Bobby Jr. asking to pick up food from the store due to Karen being busy. And Bobby says that he's stuck in traffic due to a car wreck up ahead, saying that Karen can be a pain in the butt sometimes. Just a few moments later, however, we find out who the person in the car wreck was, as Carm gets a call from Gabriella that Karen died due to a car accident, which shocked Carm and Rosalie. The crew talk to each other about Karen's death before Tony waltzes in with very little remorse, instead using this time to chastise Patsy and the guys for causing a ruckus while Junior's on trial. And Silvio takes responsibility, saying the issue hits close to home since he financially supports Italian anti-defamation organizations, and asks Tony for leadership on this issue, which Tony agrees to do. He asks Assemblyman Zellman if he can do anything to prevent the protest, but Zellman says he can't due to the First Amendment and the issue being a sensitive subject and what have you, and Tony angrily hangs up the phone. Janice talks to a therapist about her hooking up with yet another one of Tony's men, with the therapist saying that Janice is only dating these men as a way to appeal to an authority figure, who in this case is Tony, which ties back to her doing the same thing for her mother and father, and how she needs to cut off this cycle and start making better choices, which Janice agrees with. Ralphie tries to intimidate Del Redclay, the guy we saw on TV earlier as well as the spearhead of the Native American protest, by claiming that the people he's representing will reveal that Iron Eyes Clay, an actor who played many Native Americans in film, was actually of Italian heritage if they don't seize their upcoming Columbus Day Parade protest. And Redclay tells Ralphie to fuck off. Redclay shits himself at this realization as his assistant tells him to calm down. And AJ goes full intellectual as he reads out of one page of his history book. And he tells Carmen Tony that Christopher Columbus was a murderer and a slave trader. To which Tony responds by telling AJ that Columbus was a brave Italian explorer and that he will not be shamed in this household.
He discovered America is what he did. He was a brave Italian explorer, and in this house, Christopher Columbus is a hero. End of story.
We cut to Karen's funeral, where Bobby breaks down in tears at her casket while Tony conducts business with Silvio and Ralphie. And Gabriella says that she heard that other members of the crew laughed at Bobby for not having a Gumar. Meanwhile, Ralphie tries giving some money for Johnny's daughter's graduation, but Johnny angrily slaps it out of his hand and tells Tony to keep Ralphie away from him. Silvio points out Johnny's behavior toward Ralphie at the previous dinner, and Tony says that somebody must be running their flap too much, noting that Carmine is also demanding a chunk of change for Tony's property. Rosalie tells Ralphie how devastated she is and how it feels like she's surrounded by death, and Ralphie goes cool whatever and says he feels like there's nothing he can do. And when Rosalie recommends comforting and taking care of her, Ralphie says that he's not gonna get anything personally out of that and confesses that he doesn't really want to be with Rosalie anymore. And Rosalie tells him to get the fuck out of there as she breaks down into tears. Tony tells Hesh about the warehouse property issue as Ralphie purchases a horse from Hesh named Pyomai. And Tony asks Hesh if he can do something to prevent the protests of the parade from happening, and Hesh says no can do, due to the fact that they're practicing free speech, as well as the fact that Columbus was an asshole, which Hesh's friend Ruben agrees with, who details all of Columbus's other misdeeds and saying that he's no better than Hitler, a statement that causes a brief altercation between Hesh and Ruben. Carmela hangs around at Bobby's place to help around, and Bobby takes care of the kids upstairs while Carmela answers a call from Junior, who reminisces about Karen for a moment before asking if Bobby is available to take him to court, and Carmela scolds him for thinking about his own needs instead of Bobby's and hangs up. Ralphie fools around over to Janice's place hooting and hollering over breaking up with Rosalie, and Janice's heart sinks for a moment before getting distracted by Ralphie wanting to play a really creepy game of Battleship. Tony and Silvio have a talk with Chief Doug Smith, a chairman of the Mohawk Indians and owner of a big-ass casino, asking for the protest of the parade to be cancelled in some way. And Janice apologizes to Bobby for not bringing over food the other night due to more
Like you worked that ass.
pressing matters. Bobby says it's whatever and confesses to Janice that he was stuck in traffic due to Karen's accident, but that he was mad at her due to the fact that she wanted them to pick up food, and begins breaking down in tears once again. Tony gets a call from Doug the next day, who tells Tony that the request didn't go through, and that threatening to reveal Iron Eyes Cody wouldn't work either since no Native American really gives a shit anyway. And Tony tells Silvio the bad news as Silvio tries coming up with an idea to slander Red Clay as a pedophile before Tony says, fuck it, the moment's gone. Janice tells her therapist how moved she was by Bobby's emotional confession, and how she felt less than enthused when coming back to Ralphie, with the therapist telling her that Bobby represents the thing that Janice truly wants in her life. The therapist tells Janice that she needs to move on from Ralphie for his sake as well as her own. And Janice cries as we cut to Doug's casino, where Tony and the crew gamble around as Tony later tells them an unironically really funny joke.
Whenever I'm in one of these places, I remember that my grandmother was part Fagawi.
Bullshit.
No, it's true. She was. They were a nomadic tribe, and they wander around, they get lost, and they go, where the Fagawi?
Richard watches a news piece about the Columbus Day Parade and finds out that a big fight broke out between Italian Americans and Native American protesters, which Richard says is tragic. It's weird that Richard is barely in this episode, especially considering how much he's talked about Italian American pride in the past. Janice decides to cut it off with Ralphie, only instead of sitting down and having a talk with him, she yells at him for wearing his shoes indoors and pushes him down the stairs, which, honestly, yeah, good choice, he deserved it. Janice locks herself in her room as Ralphie and his fucked up back try to leave the house, and Silvio drives the guys back home while listening to the radio, where they find out that the protest was a success for the Native Americans. Silvio contemplates whacking Red Clay before Tony gets sick of this and tells Silvio to quit it, saying that he should be proud of the accomplishments he's made in his life rather than his own heritage, and once again brings up Gary Cooper, the strong silent type. Calling him a true American, says he just did what he had to do without complaining about his past and what have you. But Silvio says that Gary Cooper never suffered like Italian Americans suffered.
If he was American around nowadays, he'd be a member of some victims group. The fundamentalist Christians, the abused cowboys, the gays, whatever the fuck.
He was gay, Gary Cooper?
No! Are you listening to me?
Tony tells Silvio to take his issues up with Frankie Valli as the show cuts to black, ending the episode. This episode fucking stinks. Alright, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's still a pretty bad episode. It suffers the same issue that A Hit is a Hit suffered with, where they try to dedicate an episode to tackling a social issue, but do virtually nothing with it except acknowledge its existence and have it go nowhere with the characters or the story. The Sopranos does a much better job dealing with these types of issues when they actually affect the characters and make an impact on the story, rather than just being like, okay, gang, we're gonna talk about Columbus Day this episode. The conflict in this episode is so fucking predictable. The moment Bobby reads that passage out of the newspaper, you know exactly how the episode's gonna go down. Some characters will point out that Columbus was a very bad person who caused the death of millions of Native Americans, while the majority of the Soprano crew remained firm on their stance despite this, since Columbus is a significant source of Italian American pride to them. It'll have basically no effect on the long-term story, and none of the characters will be affected by this in the later points of the series. That's not to say this episode doesn't have good moments though, because it certainly does. Karen's death still hits pretty hard on rewatch, especially when watching Bobby sit in traffic not knowing that the jam was caused by his own wife's death. And the stuff with Janice and Ralphie getting together only for Janice to literally kick him out of there was very fun to watch too. It was also great watching Paulie cause trouble for both crews, even if he's not there in person. And the acting in this episode all around was pretty fantastic. But that's the thing. These topics are pushed to the sidelines so that they can make room for the Christopher Columbus bullshit. Other episodes of the show are like a giant gold bar, while this episode is like trying to sift through water and dirt to find a gold nugget. A golden nugget is still good, don't get me wrong, but like, I'd rather have the gold bar. Now, I'm not saying that the show shouldn't tackle Columbus Day. In fact, I'm kind of glad they did. It's an important topic and it's relevant to the show and the characters. But like, did the issue really warrant an entire episode dedicated to it? I wish this episode spent time on the far more interesting character drama that occurs in this episode rather than just dicking around. If you're gonna tackle a subject like this, you gotta make it relevant to the story in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, it's just gonna end up boring as hell. This feels like the plotline to an episode that would have taken place when the show was just finding its footing, like season 1, not during its prime. Tony is also given barely anything to do in this episode, which is especially strange given how outspoken he's been in the past about Italian American pride. That role is instead given to Silvio for whatever reason, which feels off to me. Silvio is one of the most level-headed members of the crew, yet he's the one taking the whole crew to attack protesters and contemplating whacking people. Maybe they were trying to develop his character more, but like, that never goes anywhere after this episode is over, so now it just makes zero sense for him to act out like this in hindsight. Silvio is way more calm and calculating when it comes to making moves like this, as we saw last episode when he secretly gave the okay for Patsy to steal the tiles. So making him act like a goddamn lunatic in this episode is just weird. The only real good thing that came from the Columbus Day material was the big fight that broke out between the protesters and the Soprano crew. It had some great moments, especially when Artie immediately gave up the tough guy facade and locked himself and part of this guy's slushie in the car. I contemplated whether to put this episode above or below A Hit is a Hit, and after thinking about it, I decided to put it lower. Even though A Hit is a Hit has objectively less good material, the fact that this episode has some really great moments that are sidelined in favor of a far more boring plot leaves a very, very bad taste in my mouth. At least you can skip A Hit is a Hit and not miss much. You can't do that with this one. Karen fucking dies. For the first time in any of these tier lists, I am giving this episode an F tier. Straight up garbage. If I'm gonna rewatch this episode, I'm editing in and replacing the Columbus Day scenes with Ralphie falling down the stairs over and over. At least I feel something in that scene. Season 4, Episode 4, The Wait. God, that was a horrible fucking episode. The episode opens up with Johnny Sack beating the shit out of and then pissing on Donnie, a member in Ralphie's crew, for laughing with the bartender, which reminded Johnny Sack of the Ginny fat joke that Paulie informed him of. Ginny Sack asks Johnny why his coat is all red, as Johnny Sack says it's just Kool-Aid. And the next day, Carm and Tony talk with Carm's cousin Brian, a financial consultant, to consult their finances. And Tony meets Johnny Sack to ask him what the hell he beat up Donnie for, with Johnny saying that Ralphie is holding out on a lot of money, and also mentions the other reason why he did what he did.
See what my friend said about my wife? Made a crack about Ginny's weight, something about her having a 90-pound mole on her ass.
Well, that's deplorable. Hey, some guy's wife! Come on!
Johnny tells Tony that Ginny's been suffering with weight issues for a while now, but that he still loves her regardless.
To me, she's beautiful. Rubenesque.
Tony says he understands the issue, but that he really shouldn't be acting like this over a stupid joke, and tells Johnny to try and make amends. And Johnny says he'll send something nice to Donnie's mother as a way to say, sorry I pissed on your child. Carm and Furio talk with each other in the kitchen once more, with Furio complaining about the fact that he can't change his garage into his guest house for legal reasons. And Carm goes, ooh, check out this book, and reads out various legal jargon as an excuse to get physically closer to Furio. Meadow signs up to volunteer at a law center, while Silvio, Tony, and Chris debate who was the one who leaked the joke to Johnny, with Tony mentioning that he somehow found out about the abandoned warehouse Tony bought by the Esplanade. And Silvio walks out with his McDonald's, as Tony theorized that it could be Silvio flapping his gums to Johnny due to his strange behavior recently. Melfi tells Elliot that Bill Hader's son has been seemingly less motivated recently at college, saying that he's contemplating dropping out and that he also hasn't talked with his father much ever since Melfi was raped, with Elliot theorizing that he blames himself for feeling powerless to the situation and resents his father for the same shortcomings. Ralphie shit talks Janice to his crew and claims that she wanted to stick a dildo up his ass and act all dominant to him, which, I mean, that's crazy, man. I mean, what a concept. And Tony comes in and confronts Ralphie about the joke, and Ralphie tries playing dumb before Tony cuts him off and tells Ralphie to call Johnny and try to make the situation better. He denies telling the Ginny fat joke at dinner that night, while also offering to apologize to Johnny like that makes sense. And Johnny calls Ralphie a weasel before angrily hanging up the phone, with Tony yelling at Ralphie afterwards that he specifically told him not to apologize. Luckily, every character in the scenario knows that what Ralphie said was just a dumb joke, so the conflict eventually blows over and nobody gets hurt.
I want you to sanction the hit on Ralph Cifaretto.
Come on! Carmine luckily acts as the voice of reason and tells Johnny that having Ralphie clipped over this is stupid and would cost millions of dollars due to Ralphie being a great earner. And Johnny continues talking about how he violated his wife's honor, while Carmine continues telling him that this ain't happening. Meadow talks with his lady Rahima at the dorm before Meadow notices Tony walking around with a box of Krispy Kreme, and she invites him in, with Tony asking about Meadow volunteering at the South Bronx Law Center. He expresses his worries about her working in law rather than being a pediatrician like she initially wanted, and theorizes that she only wants to start working with minorities to get back at him for being mean to Noah, with Meadow saying that the world doesn't revolve around Tony. Tony then goes, fuck it, and offers to take Meadow to the store. And later, Elliot and Tony have a very brief encounter with each other as Elliot nearly runs over Tony with his car. Tony and Carmine meet with Ralphie and Johnny to try and settle this issue once and for all. And Johnny gives up after literally 3 seconds and says that he can't be in the same room as Ralphie. Elliot meets with his daughter Saskia, the lady who encouraged Meadow to volunteer, and they talk about Bill Hader's son dropping out of college as Saskia claims that he's just needy for attention. Carm consolidates bills at home and gets pissed at Tony for being all nonchalant and bored when Brian came over earlier, saying that Tony doesn't care about their financial future as the two start arguing with each other. Junior meets with Johnny, Carmine, Silvio, and Tony over flip phone to discuss the conflict with Johnny and Ralphie. And Johnny continues refusing to budge or come to any agreements as Tony tells Johnny to confess who told him this info so that he can prove that the joke was even made in the first place. But Johnny, realizing that it probably wouldn't be worth it to escalate the conflict this far, refuses to do so, as Tony tells him that killing Ralphie isn't going to solve anything, while Carmine says that there's too much money on the line, and tells Johnny to either accept a financial compromise or get over it. Johnny walks out of the meeting again while Junior eats chocolate on the other line, and Tony gets a call from Carmine the next day, who says that he took Johnny out to dinner to try and squash the beef again, but didn't get very far. He subtly implies to Tony that Johnny's gonna need to be taken care of. And Tony, Chris, and Silvio shoot some dirty looks at Ralphie later at the Bing.
You never made a joke about Ginny Sack.
Not like that.
She's so fat,
Her blood type is ragu.
When Ginny hauls ass, she's gotta make 2 trips.
Tony yells at Ralphie to quit making smart-ass remarks, and later talks to Junior about the whole ordeal and how complicated it is, since he wants to protect his captains, but that Ralphie is also a huge asshole, and mentions that Carmine gave him the okay to kill Johnny, with Junior giving Tony ideas on how to take him out, including calling a guy named Lou DiMaggio and the Atwell Avenue Boys, a crew of hitmen working in Rhode Island. Tony sends Chris and Silvio up to Rhode Island, and they enter into one of the creepiest scenes of the entire show, where they make a deal with Lou and the Atwell Avenue Boys to take out Johnny Sack for $20K. And the boys tell a story of how they once killed a guy by chopping his head off with a hacksaw, offering to arrange something of this caliber with Johnny, as Silvio's like, I think just shooting it would be fine. Creepy blurry eyes lady offers Chris and Silvio cake as they say no thanks and run the fuck out of there. And Johnny gets a call from one of his guys, who informs Johnny that Ralphie's been spotted at a hotel in Miami. And Johnny approves a hit on Ralphie, saying that he'll deal with any blowback later. That's right, we got 2 separate hits going on at the same time. Strap on that safety belt and hold on tight, folks! Carm forces AJ to come along to visit Furio's place. And Furio tells Carm a story of how he used to be a landscaper back in Italy as the two look romantically in each other's eyes. Johnny and Ginny say they love each other before Johnny drives off to work. And Johnny realizes he forgot his sweater back at home while Ralphie relaxes at the hotel, trying to get away from the mess for a while as a suspicious man informs another suspicious man that Ralphie's at the pool. As Johnny arrives back home, he realizes that the door is unlocked and yells for Ginny, and he spots her in the basement on the floor, quickly trying to hide something from Johnny. Johnny takes off the blanket and reveals a box filled to the brim with unhealthy snacks and candy, revealing that Ginny wasn't trying nearly as hard to lose weight as Johnny thought.
I was dizzy. I was having low blood sugar.
What happened to the fruit salad then?
You were the one who was supposed to quit smoking and didn't.
That contains an addictive substance.
What's wrong with you? Why are you yelling at me?
That contains an addictive substance.
Johnny continues chastising Ginny for lying to him, but eventually calms down and tells Ginny that he still loves her regardless in this emotional moment. Back in Florida, an assassin pulls up to the hotel in search of Ralphie, but receives a call from one of Johnny's guys that Johnny's decided to call off the hit in the nick of time. As Ralphie walks into the elevator with the assassin, there's this really intense moment where the assassin and Ralphie stare at each other before Ralphie gets off, asking what the guy's problem is as the assassin says nothing. Furio holds a housewarming party to warm his house, and asshole AJ locks Bobby Jr. in a garage out of boredom while Furio starts dancing to an Italian song with various ladies. At one point, Furio and Carmela start dancing with each other, with Carmela looking the most happy that she's ever been in the show. After this, we cut to another Melfi Elliott meeting, where Melfi says that she feels guilty giving Tony family advice while she's struggling herself, wondering if her husband had a point about being in a parking garage that late at night. And Elliott tells Melfi of the scene from earlier where he had a slight issue with the big Bluto sort of guy, saying that at that moment, he was reminded of Melfi. He tells Melfi that she can't blame herself for what happened to her as the show cuts to Johnny walking into the Bing, once and for all accepting an apology from Ralphie, as well as apologizing for pissing all over Donnie. He tells Tony to not make any more weight remarks and walks out of there. And the show cuts to Tony giving Carm a bouquet of flowers as well as a new black dress, which Carm puts on for Tony. The two start a game of Battleship as the music Furio was playing earlier starts blaring from Meadow's room, and Carm gets up from bed, demanding Meadow to turn it the fuck down. Despite this, however, the music continues playing in Carmela's head, reminding her of the joy she felt dancing with Furio. And she has a hard time focusing on the game with Tony as the show fades to black. Ending the episode. This was another pretty good episode. Say what you will about Johnny Sack, but one thing that you cannot say is that that man doesn't love his wife with all of his heart. Him and Ginny have easily one of the healthiest relationships in the entire series. Their bond shown prominently during the scene where Johnny catches Ginny cheating on her diet, but still saying that he loves and is proud of her regardless. Somewhat unrelated, but that scene is one of my all-time favorite exchanges in The Sopranos.
You were the one who was supposed to quit smoking and didn't.
Nicotine's an addictive substance.
What is wrong with you? Why are you yelling
Nicotine's an addictive substance.
This man loves his wife so much that he doesn't even call her fat. He describes her as Rubenesque. This is another one of those cases where a popular TV show causes a certain word that's gotten unused for like a century to suddenly increase in popularity. The whole plot with Johnny being completely unreasonable was really good, and I love the moment where he tells Carmine he wants Ralphie killed. Johnny's saying all this stuff about how Ralphie violated Ginny's honor, and then Carmine immediately ruins any chance of Johnny making a decent argument by asking if Ralphie slept with Ginny. This episode wasn't nearly as good as I remember, but it was good nonetheless. The Johnny-Ralphie conflict was very fun to follow, and Furio and Carmela getting closer with each other was also interesting to watch, if not very awkward. I also genuinely thought Ralphie was going to be killed anyway back when I first watched the show, and I can still feel that tension on rewatch even though I already know what's gonna happen. I'm feeling a low 8 here for this one.
Those goddamn deal-a-meal cards!
Season 4, Episode 5. Pie oh my. Okay, be careful. Don't break any of my shit. Hey, stop! That's right. Stop! No! Tony and Silvio show up to the Crazy Horse as Adriana's like, haha, I'm not nervous. And she looks nervously at the two as they sit at the other end of the bar, hallucinating Tony finding out that Adriana's an FBI informant while Tony calls Carm about investment planning with cousin Brian. I love this moment where the show uses these Dutch angles and distorted music in the background to convey Adriana's fear. It reminds me of that moment from the first season of Breaking Bad when Walt hears one of his students say something menacing, minus the obnoxious sound effect.
Yes, Ben. Is this gonna be on the murder?
Adriana realizes that her club is going to be used for more than just drinking and dancing and whatnot, as Chris enters the place and helps Silvio and Furio bring inside some guy indebted to the mob to beat the shit out of him, which Adriana secretly watches from outside, terrified. The next day, Janice creepily stares out the window at Bobby talking with his red-headed lady while Adriana gets her hair done, and she gets a call from Deborah, who tells her to meet them at a bakery. Janice barges her way into Bobby's home and meets the red-headed lady, Jojo Palmisi, the widowed wife of Midol enthusiast Mikey Palmisi, and the two try their best to win over Bobby's affection by doing nice things for him like bringing over dinner. Jojo leaves the place as Janice takes Jojo's chicken for Bobby and puts it in the freezer, and notes the many other dishes given to Bobby inside, including a dish of ziti, which Bobby knows was the last thing Karen cooked before she died, which makes Bobby cry as Janice comforts him. Adriana arrives at the bakery and tells Deborah to eat shit, and this other lady, Agent Sanseverino, asks Adriana about a man that Chris was with the night before named Chip Zotto, and Adriana pretends like she doesn't know who that is, even though she definitely saw him get beat up last night. They point out how weird it is that Adriana doesn't know where Chris is half the time or if he's ever in trouble, and while Adriana says that Tony would never put him in harm's way since he's a loved one, Harris and the others are like, what about Pussy and Richie April? Making Adriana worry as they imply that they weren't just placed into the witness protection program. Deborah tells Adriana that she's gonna be working with Sanseverino for now and subtly wishes Adriana luck with her pregnancy issues. And Adriana tells Deb to fuck herself as Harris asks Adriana to start heading over to Tony's house often to collect information about him, as Adriana throws up in the toilet instead of on the table this time. Karn pitches the idea of putting $10K into a medical stock that cousin Brian recommended, and Tony says that money's tight right now before heading outside to grab wads of cash out of the birdseed. The next day, Tony and the crew head out to check out Pie oh my, as Ralphie complains that she's been falling behind recently and costing him cash. Tony's love for animals comes into play once again as he talks about how beautiful the horse is, contrasting Ralphie as he says some shit about turning the thing into glue if she doesn't start winning.
Wire to wire. And tell that midget not to be shy with the whip.
Only his mother had taken that advice.
Janice goes over to Junior's place and shamelessly hands over Jojo's chicken dinner for Bobby, pretending like she made it for Junior. Janice says that she wants to attend court with Junior, but that she's been busy helping Bobby with the kids and his sadness. And Junior goes womp womp before finding out that Bobby was at his house the other day, mentioning that Bobby was supposed to help him with something before angrily walking out of there. Tony talks with his accountant at the racetracks about Carmelo's recent money moves and how it's making him nervous since he doesn't want Carm getting carried away. And his accountant advises against a life insurance trust pitched by cousin Brian since it could cause trouble for Tony if him and Carmela ever get divorced, basically saying that the only person benefiting from the trust at any point would be Carmela. But Tony gets distracted by the race beginning before thinking about this further. Pie oh my kicks ass at the race and causes the whole crew to jizz their britches in excitement. And Ralphie later promises Tony a taste of the winnings as a thank you for his earlier advice to hold her back. Tony gives some of Ralphie's winnings to Carm and decides to sign the papers given to them by Brian, which puts Carm in a happy mood. That happy mood quickly dissipates, however, as Tony refuses to sign the paper on the trust his accountant recommended against, acting vague about it before citing concerns about the government peeking their nose in, and saying that he gave Carm 2 out of 3 signatures, which pisses off Carm as she heads upstairs. Adriana tries to get out of spying on Tony by pretending to be sick so she can't go to dinner with Chris, Tony, and Carm. And Chris acts all selfish and is like, come on, please! And then rambles about how nothing ever goes his way while smoking heroin. Janice continues trying to make a good impression on Bobby and his kids by making them dinner and allowing them to eat in front of the TV, and mentions Junior being pissed at Bobby and asking what's up, with Bobby saying that he was supposed to do something with a union business, as well as the fact that he feels guilty for letting Junior down recently. And Janice motivates him by saying that Bobby and his kids are gonna be fucked if he doesn't pull his goddamn weight soon while rubbing his hand. Tony talks with cousin Brian about other trusts to invest in while showing him Pie oh my, and they later go to the horse race with Ralphie, where Pie oh my beats the competition once again. Ralphie also once again decides to give Tony a share of the winnings for his advice, and Tony very subtly demands Ralphie for a bigger portion of cash, creating this very brief yet tense moment. Tony Tony arrives home as Carm enters the kitchen all pissed off. And Tony tries to make her feel better by mentioning the property he bought off Junior's making good cash and that they should buy that medical stock. But Carm says that they missed it since it's split and goes upstairs angry again. Bobby takes Janice's advice and finally does what Junior asked him to do, going under a fake name and intimidating a shop steward to change his vote in an upcoming election. Adriana watches TV all depressed as Chris enters the apartment, and Adriana gives him hugs and kisses, saying that she worries about him staying out all the time, a result of Harris and the other FBI people planting those seeds of doubt in Adriana's mind earlier. She makes eggs for him and notices Chris hiding his piece, making her more concerned as she pitches the idea of moving to another place with Chris, paraphrasing Harris's earlier quote that they've got their whole life ahead of them, and says that she worries about Chris getting into trouble or going to jail as Chris says to stop being negative, saying that he's still worried about that bird that was staring at him out the window when he was made, and that he doesn't want any other weird jinx cursed doohickey shit.
I worry about you, that's all. I love you so much.
So if you love me, stir my eggs, okay?
Chris is a fucking cunt. Adriana reluctantly allows the mafia guys to enter her club, and they head to the back office, where we're treated to this amazing moment of Vito taking a tumble.
What the fuck you think cheese is? Mo.
Now, a lot of people believe that this moment was unscripted, and for the longest time, I believed it too. However, I did some snooping around, and I stumbled upon a copy of the script for this episode, which details the scene that you just witnessed. I'll put a link in the description for the post where I found this. There's no 100% confirmation on whether or not this was scripted, but I'm personally inclined to believe that it was, even if those laughs sounded way too genuine for them to be scripted. Junior watches a news piece about his case while getting ready for court, and Junior gets pissed off at the illustration of his likeness made by the courtroom artist and promptly turns off the TV. Bobby cheers up Junior and says that he's taking care of Junior's task, and Bobby thanks Janice for this sudden motivation, which confuses Junior. Bobby mentions her helping with the kids as well as making food for them, mentioning her lasagna that contains sweet sausage inside, which Junior mentions is how Carmela makes her lasagna, revealing that Janice did the same thing she did with JoJo's chicken dish and passed someone else's cooking off as her own. Junior warns Bobby in a similar way he did with Richie back in season 2, implying that messing with Janice is risky business as the show cuts to Adriana complaining to Chris that the mob guys are causing Adriana trouble by loitering around on the Crazy Horse, and Chris tries justifying it by saying that Tony has done a great deal of good for Chris's life, and that the cops don't even care about the place anyways, ha 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 ha, and then Adriana falls and dies.
Until then.
Chris tells Adriana that they're having Sunday dinner at Tony's and that she's not missing it this time, and Adriana sits depressed on the floor. Junior hilariously looks over angrily at the courtroom artist so that he doesn't fuck up his profile, and Adriana later meets with Harris and San Severino, who asks for any interesting information that she might have. They name some of the mob guys who are in the Crazy Horse as Adriana slips some details about Patsy Parisi, saying that he obtains suits from White Plains frequently. Meanwhile, Bobby, in a noticeably better mood, thanks Janice for all she's done and suggests going out to eat for dinner. And Janice suggests eating Karen Ziti, which Bobby says he's not ready to do yet. Tony and Ralphie conduct business in the Crazy Horse office as Adriana secretly briefly listens in. And Ralphie complains about Pyomai's vet bills, with Tony suggesting that they switch the shoes that she wears. Ralphie later gets a call from his maid, who says that Pyomai is very sick and that the vet won't do shit until he gets paid. And Ralphie goes, boring, and forces somebody else to deal with this. That's somebody else being Tony, who politely tells Carmela to shut the door.
Carmela, can you shut the door? Carmela, can you please shut the door?
Carmela is still pissed with Tony as Tony gets a call from Ralph's maid, who relays the situation onto Tony. And Tony gets up to fix the issue, while Adriana creates more issues for herself by snatching from Chris's heroin stash. We get this really sad shot of Adriana hunched over after injecting, while Tony goes down to the stables, where the vet says that he's given Pyomai a shot to calm down as Tony angrily forks over the money. We're given one of my personal favorite endings to any Sopranos episode, as Tony walks into Pyomai's stable, with Pyomai calmly lying down on the ground. Tony comforts Pyomai and pets her, sitting down in the bucket as the rain pours outside. He pulls out a cigar as a goat joins Tony and Pyomai, and Tony smiles to himself as the show fades to black, ending the episode. We're finally given another look into Tony's love for animals, which, in my opinion, is one of the most fascinating aspects of Tony's character. If you ever introduce somebody to The Sopranos and ask them what they think after the first episode, 9 times out of 10, that person is gonna be like, Wow, Tony really likes those fucking ducks, huh? Honestly, I can't even blame people for saying this. It's such a unique part of Tony's character, and it's probably the last thing you'd expect to come out of a show about a mafia boss who kills people for money. Despite the anger and the frustration that Tony feels for his family and his crew, when it comes to animals, his entire worldview does a complete 180. You could make a pretty solid argument that the ending to this episode is the strongest that Tony ever displays any feelings of love, satisfaction, or comfort throughout the entire show. He still loves his family, obviously, but when it comes to animals, it feels so much more genuine. It's so surreal to see this level of care coming from the same guy who beats the shit out of people and yells at everyone and fucking beats his phone in. Despite Tony being the toughest and most dangerous member of his crew, he also has one of the most notable soft spots of any character in the show, which is perfectly contrasted in this episode by insane psychopath Ralphie Cifaretto, who could not give less of a shit if Pyomai lives or dies. Even somebody as destructive and evil as Tony is capable of recognizing and appreciating the pure innocence of an animal, which is such an interesting concept to think about. Like, imagine if Stalin liked donuts. Like, he's this evil guy who caused the death of millions of people, but like, what if he had a fondness for donuts? What if that was like one of the only things that brought him joy? Okay, anyways, overall, this episode was pretty solid. As most of you probably guessed by the title of this episode, we're introduced to racehorse Pyomai, a storyline that I personally enjoy a lot. It's funny watching Ralphie and Tony completely contrast each other when it comes to caring for Pyomai, with Tony taking time out of his day to consider what kind of shoes would be comfortable for Pyomai to wear, while Ralphie's like, fuck the bill, I just want to sit home and jerk off. Watching poor Adriana go through all this emotional turmoil is also so compelling. She tries so hard to care for Christopher and gets nothing but shit from him, while also trying to cooperate with a bunch of feds breathing down her neck. She's not a perfect character by any means, but still, I feel bad for her. It's also nice to watch Bobby start emotionally recovering from Karen's death, even if it's at the hands of sneaky-ass Janice. I'm feeling another low A tier for this one. Alright, you're getting momentum, Season 4. Don't stop now. Season 4, Episode 6. Everybody Hurts. Everybody hurts. Adriana and Chris kickstart a heroin binge while watching TV, and Tony calls Chris, telling him to meet him in 20 minutes, and Chris tries psyching himself up before leaving. We watch McLovin smoke his cigarette as AJ hangs out with his friends and girlfriend, telling them about his father and how he totally works in waste management now. One of AJ's friends mentions that Tony owns a strip club as Chris struggles to exit out of his sleepy time heroin mood, and lies to Tony, saying that he and Adriana had some wine. Tony delivers some very important news to Chris while stealing his box of cigarettes, revealing that, over the course of the next few years, he'll be passing his orders for the crew through Christopher, and that at a certain point, he'll be passing them exclusively through Chris, as a way to avoid the government and wiretaps and all that. Tony says that the reason he's doing this is because he and Christopher are blood relatives, unlike someone like Silvio or Paulie, which makes Chris excited. Chris thanks Tony for this, repeating his earlier quote of following Tony into hell and thanking him for letting him kill his father's murderer, and AJ directs his friends to where he believes is the strip club, only to lead them to the pork store, saying that he got his directions mixed up and that this is where his dad's office is, which is great information to be giving away to the public. Carm walks downstairs wondering where the hell AJ is until Furio walks by as she goes, hey, and later asks Tony about Furio, saying that he seems lonely and that he should have someone in his life, you know, blonde hair, kind of short, mob affiliated, you know, something like that. Carm pitches the idea of setting him up with her dental hygienist, and also delivers some very surprising news to Tony, saying that Gloria Trillo recently committed suicide by hanging herself, and Tony lies in bed shocked, not saying anything. Artie agrees to loan $50K to the older brother of a new hostess named Elodie, who wants the money to purchase the distribution rights of a new kind of vodka, and Charmaine tells Elodie to get back to cleaning shit up. Tensions between Artie and Charmaine are still high, as Charmaine criticizes Artie for his lackluster business practices, while Artie continues insisting that he's gonna hit the big bucks eventually. Tony drives over to Globe Motors to confirm Gloria's death, with one of the employees informing Tony that they don't know exactly why she did it, and that he had the impression that she wasn't very lucky with men, which is certainly one way of putting it. Artie meets with Ralphie to borrow $50,000, claiming that he's gonna use it to upgrade the kitchen of Vesuvio, but Ralphie denies this offer, saying that he wouldn't be able to harm Artie due to Artie's friendship with Tony. Speaking of which, Tony has another meeting with Melfi and asks her if Gloria Trillo is still hanging around. Very bold choice of words. And Melfi says that Gloria's death was a tragedy, and Tony quickly bolts from his chair, angrily yelling at Melfi and claiming that she lied to him for not telling him this news sooner. Melfi notes the smell of alcohol on Tony's breath as he asks Melfi why she didn't help Gloria, but Melfi says that she gave her everything she could like she does with all of her other patients. Tony begins blaming himself for Gloria's suicide as Melfi says that there is no one cause, saying that even Tony himself said that Gloria was crazy, and Tony mentions that Gloria reached out to him for help, but that he never answered. Tony later goes to Artie's house and asks why he went to Ralphie for money instead of him. And Artie says that he didn't want to mess up their friendship and explains the nuts and bolts of the deal to him. Tony, still guilty over not helping Gloria during her times of need, insists on helping Artie out by giving him the loan, which Artie gladly accepts. Tony walks out of the place and immediately starts downing the bottle. And the show cuts to a dream sequence of Tony meeting at Gloria's house, the bottle that Artie gave to him in hand. They start making out before the bell dings on Gloria's oven, and Tony looks up to see cracks forming by the chandelier, the place that Carmela told Tony was where Gloria hung herself. We get a shot of Tony staring into the bottle as we suddenly cut to Gloria asking if he wants to see her kitty cat or her neck first, and Tony suddenly jolts up from bed. I personally believe that this dream is meant to represent the closure that Tony wants to gain between him and Gloria that he can no longer receive, along as a subconscious warning that Tony is only helping Artie because of his guilt toward Gloria, represented by the chunks of the ceiling next to the chandelier dropping into the glass of vodka Artie gave to Tony. Tony wakes up from the dream and treats his recent behavior with Prozac, and cousin Brian shows up with the living trust papers, which Tony has finally agreed to sign, likely as another way for Tony to make up for the guilt he feels for not helping Gloria. The same oven bell from Tony's dream dings in the kitchen, and cousin Brian leaves as Tony gives Brian Patsy's number for some sick new suits, continuing Tony's recent streak of good deeds. Artie secretly hands the cash over to Elodie's brother John Philippe while AJ makes out with his girlfriend Devin, and Carm interrupts their session and tells them to be careful of the Yadro, saying that she doesn't want to mention how much it costs, and then mentioning that it costs $3,000 5 seconds later. AJ pitches the idea of using Meadow's dorm room as a fuck bed, and calls Meadow, who gives him directions to her office. They're driven over to the South Bronx Law Center, and AJ asks Meadow if they can use her room to play Battleship, which Meadow says is disgusting and that that's not happening. AJ and Devin talk about how lucky they are to grow up in rich families on the way home, and Artie asks Elodie how John Philippe's doing with the money, and Elodie goes, "Oh, I don't know, tee hee hee," and then runs away. And Charmaine walks in and makes fun of Artie for being stupid. Adriana works out with Carmela as Carm notes that Adriana's barely at the house anymore. And Adriana says Chris has had the flu recently and also tells Carm that she and Chris might not be able to go to a Billy Joel concert Tony and Carm got tickets for. Noting various issues as Carm's like, boy oh boy, now who am I gonna give these tickets to anyway? Ho hum diddly do. Janice and Tony later eat at Vesuvio, and Tony asks Janice about Bobby, with Janice telling Tony to mind his fucking business while Tony says that he just wanted to say he's nice. Tony once again asks if he's a toxic person, the same thing he asked Artie at his place earlier, and Janice says that Tony always reaches out when it counts, which makes Tony feel a little better. Tony later pisses and farts into a sink as Artie says that Jean Philippe isn't returning his calls, and Tony tells him that he's gotta toughen up and confront him at his home, and Artie later practices his tough guy act so he can get that money.
I called you 5 times. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Message machine broken.
You fucking avoiding me, motherfucker? Where's my money? Oh, what are you gonna cry now, huh? Stand up, you frog-eating fudge-to-gots. I will fuck you up, man.
I love how Artie assumes that Jean Philippe will break down in tears just by him asking where the money is. Chris goes on a heroin binge with this guy while Artie goes to Jean Philippe's apartment, attempting to intimidate him into giving him his money, which goes horribly.
You fucking French fucking lying cocksucker!
Oh, fuck to your mother!
Fuck!
Oh, fuck!
Artie finally gets karma for flirting with Adriana and has his earring ripped out by Jean Philippe, who kicks him out of the apartment, leaving Artie $50,000 as well as one earring in the hole, along with one hole in the ear. AJ's friend Patrick gives him advice on how to find the patrol boat and Battleship as they drive to Devin's house, a ginormous Bruce Wayne mansion type, which surprises AJ. And Artie sits at home crying and realizing he's fucked. Tony hangs out with one of his Gumars before getting a call from Artie, who apologizes to Tony and cries and says that he's a failure, and Tony quickly gets his clothes on and calls 911, believing that Artie might be attempting suicide, not wanting them to end up like Gloria. AJ and Patrick walk around Devin's house, which contains some of Picasso's paintings as well as a mint-condition copy of the Beatles album Rubber Soul, and AJ says he wished Devin would have mentioned something about the extravagant wealth that her family has amassed. In one of the best scenes of the episode, Tony meets Artie at the hospital, who tells Tony that the money's gone. Tony once again asks Artie why he didn't just come and talk with him, saying that he's his friend and asking what would have happened if Artie wasn't able to reach Tony and went through with suicide, asking how Tony would have felt. Tony decides to help Artie out by paying off his tab as well as assuming Artie's $50,000 debt. Artie goes from crying to feeling good and immediately becomes way too comfortable, acting all cool and saying that Tony knew that all of this was coming and that he can see 20 moves down the road. This is probably the worst possible thing Artie could have said in this situation due to the fact that Tony wasn't able to see Gloria's suicide coming. And Tony asks what the fuck he's talking about and starts yelling at Artie.
Your mind goes through all the permutations at like internet speed and realizes, oh, worst case scenario, I eat for free.
You fucking suicide. You're disgraceful.
I'm sorry.
Tony distances himself from Artie's loan and makes up a story that Artie got mugged and had his earring ripped out. And while Artie says that he got his stomach pumped and that the doctors know he was drinking, Tony says, "Tough shit, you got mugged," and walks out. Tony and Carm, along with Brian and his wife, go out to eat before the Billy Joel concert, with Furio and the dentist taking Chris and Adriana's place. Tony tells a story of how deja vu from one of his dreams inspired him to propose to Carmela, and Carmela stares at Furio from across the table before everyone clinks their glasses. Tony talks to Melfi about Artie, saying that Tony saw everything coming, with Melfi pointing out that Tony uses people all the time in his line of work. Melfi asks Tony if his reaction to Artie's comment would have differed if Tony didn't find out about Gloria's suicide, and Tony basically says that having 2 suicides in his life in this short a period would have been too much to handle. Tony later gets his $50K back by sending an actual intimidating guy to John Philippe's place, and Patrick later asks AJ at a friend's place why Tony doesn't have Don Corleone money, and AJ says he doesn't know, ending the episode. This was a great episode. Artie once again demonstrates that he's secretly one of the best characters in the show as we finally get some more time dedicated to him, and his plotline in this episode is fantastic. I absolutely love how in over his head Artie is at every turn. Just because you have ties to the Mafia doesn't mean you're able to act like you're in the Mafia. John Ventimiglia once again gives an incredible performance as Artie in this episode, and James Gandolfini's performance as Tony in this episode was just as amazing, though that probably doesn't need to be said. The way that Tony deals with Gloria's suicide throughout this episode is really compelling. You'd think that a guy who kills people and orders people to be killed would be less affected by something like this. This show does a great job at fleshing out its characters by pinpointing and tackling their soft spots and their weak points, and how it affects their dynamics with other characters, as well as how it affects other characters in general. It's also interesting how Gloria's death affected Tony so deeply, considering the intense conflict that they faced in the final few episodes of season 3. It's never confirmed in the show whether or not Gloria's suicide was actually caused by her failed relationship with Tony, and me personally, I think it probably was. That line that Patsy delivers to Gloria about how her death wouldn't be cinematic sticks out a lot in my mind when thinking about her character. And I'm sure that Gloria took a lot of time to think about that sentence, along with Tony in this episode, since he likely told Patsy to repeat that line to her. Like Janice said earlier though, you can never truly know the reason why. I'm glad that this show was able to tie the knot on Gloria's character in a very interesting way. Okay, let me rephrase that. I'm glad that the show didn't leave Gloria hanging. I'm feeling a strong A tier for this episode. Season 4, Episode 7. Watching Too Much Television. No, I'm not. Shut up.
What do you hear? What do you say?
Best introduction ever. The episode opens on the crew celebrating Paulie's departure from prison at the Bing, as Silvio plays the song Nancy by Frank Sinatra over the speakers, which Paulie says is his song. Bobby asks Silvio why the fuck that's his song, as Paulie starts immediately annoying Tony, saying that he wished that he got some extra cash in prison, as Tony notes that he literally just gave him an envelope of cash on top of the no-show jobs from earlier. Adriana watches a courtroom drama on TV, and one of the characters reveals that she can't testify against the plaintiff since they got married, meaning that they have spousal privilege as the show zooms in on Adriana. We cut to cousin Brian, who wakes up at the Bing after a long night of Battleship, and they go out for breakfast, where cousin Brian tells Ralphie and Tony about a scam in Harlem he heard from a guy in school involving HUD, buying terrible houses for cheap, and non-profit organizations. Though we don't get to hear the full details, the show cuts to the outside of the restaurant. Furio drives Tony over to a sauna as he looks through photos of his housewarming party, paying a particular amount of attention to a photo of Carmela. We're taken to the sauna with Tony, Ralphie, and Zellman as we're introduced to this new guy, Maurice, a friend of Zellman's and leader of a non-profit group, while Furio calls Carmela, claiming that he left his sunglasses there as an excuse to talk with Carm. He mentions that the photos from his housewarming finally arrived and describes the photo of Carmela as pretty, and Carm says that she can't find the sunglasses as Furio goes, ha 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 ha, okay, and hangs up the phone. Zellman discusses his friendship with Maurice as well as how things were during the Newark riots, and Tony leaves to hit the showers as Ralphie pitches the scheme to Maurice, saying they'll give $500,000 to Dr. Freed the penis doctor, have him purchase 4 houses for $125,000 apiece, reappraise them to $300,000 each, then have Maurice give the fake reappraisals to HUD under the guise of converting them to low-cost housing for families in need as part of his non-profit group, take these newly approved mortgage applications to the bank, take the cash, and then fail to repay the mortgage as a result of numerous issues like unforeseen construction delays that forced the project to be cancelled. It's simple. Zellman walks out of the sauna and surprises Tony by telling him that he's dating Irina, saying that he felt like he needed to tell Tony, as Tony says that he's fine with it, wishing Zellman the best while warning him that Irina is a little needy, the understatement of the fucking century.
I hate you!
Dr. Freed goes along with the scam as San Severino surprises Adriana at a dollar store, asking about how Chris feels about Paulie being let out of jail as well as how he's dealing with his drug problem. And Adriana denies Chris having a problem as San Severino asks how Adriana is doing herself. And Adriana says that she's doing fan-diddly-tastic and that her and Chris are considering getting married. Drawing back to the moment near the beginning of this episode where Adriana learned about spousal privilege. Tony brings AJ to the same church that he brought Meadow to all the way back in the pilot episode, telling him a similar story of how their ancestors came into America with barely any money and how they built this church by themselves instead of receiving help from the government, lamenting that the area used to be 100% Italian and that fellow Italians keep the building alive by going there every Sunday to worship, to which AJ hilariously asks why they never go there. Tony responds to this by dodging the question and repeating an earlier quote from Brian.
Buy land, I guess. God ain't making any more of it.
Buy land, AJ, because God ain't making any more of it.
Tony fools around with AJ over to a black neighborhood that they're going to be purchasing the houses at, and one of the residents walks over to the car, asking if they want any yummy, delicious drugs and aggressively saying to get off their street if they're not buying.
Unless you want something, motherfucker, get the fuck off our street.
Oh, the language on you. You blow your father with that mouth?
The fuck you say to my sister?
Bitch.
The guy continues threatening Tony as Tony gets to leaving, and AJ lays down the quote of a generation.
So that's a crack hoe.
Keep your fucking cracker ass off my motherfucking block.
Come on, ease up, ease up.
The FBI discussed the potential marriage between Chris and Adriana and whether or not it'll hurt or harm them, and they eventually decide on letting it happen, saying it could build more pressure on Adriana to eventually confess. Maurice gets the mortgage applications approved by HUD as the employee draws this weird ass backwards check mark, and Tony drives over to Zellman's place, with the show zooming in on Zellman's one license plate.
You know, really would have been better if we met over at Denny's.
Oh my god, no it wouldn't! Shut the fuck up! Tony notices a suspicious pair of red high heels on the carpet as he tells Zellman that one of the houses they bought is a crack den, asking Zellman to send some cops over to assert their dominance as Irina walks into the scene, making things considerably more awkward. Zellman tries to tell Tony to see the big picture of the whole situation as Tony demands him to figure something out, and Adriana pitches the idea of getting married to Chris, saying they've been engaged for 2 years and that a husband and a wife can't legally testify against each other. Adriana puts her foot on Chris's balls as Chris says that they can't be getting high and running a club when they have a kid. And Adriana finally admits to Chris what she told Deborah at the beginning of the season, saying that it might be difficult for them to have kids in the future. And Chris becomes absolutely livid, calling Adriana damaged goods and that he's pissed that she never told him. He rants and raves about how he wants his son to carry on the Moltisanti name and how adopting is for losers before storming out of the apartment, leaving Adriana crying. It is odd that Adriana waited this long to admit this news to Christopher, but calling your girlfriend of 4 odd years damaged goods is fucking crazy. At the bang, Chris tells Tony, Silvio, and Paulie about the situation, and Tony and Silvio tell Chris that he should stay with Adriana regardless, saying that he doesn't want to end up marrying someone awful and that modern technology and medicine can do great things for them. While Paulie advises Chris to stay single as long as possible, Silvio tells Paulie to shut up as Tony mentions that Adriana stayed by Chris's side in the hospital after his attack, saying to do the same for Adriana, and Chris says he'll go think about it as he shoots up a metric fuck ton of heroin later that night, not thinking about it. Zellman later goes to Maurice's house to tell him to get the crack addicts out of one of the houses, saying they use some of the people in his organization since using white people to raid a house in the ghetto would raise a lot of flags. While Maurice isn't on board with this, Zellman uses the threat he got from Tony on Maurice, saying that he'll be losing out on $7,000 on his end if things aren't taken care of before leaving, and warns Maurice not to fuck around with Tony before going back to fuck around with Tony. Melfi criticizes Tony at their next meeting for blowing up at her last episode, saying that they've been down this road before and that anger is okay unless you nearly kill someone because of it. Tony says he was pissed because Melfi lied to him, and while Melfi says that she didn't, Tony rephrases it and says that she withheld information about a very sensitive subject, drawing a lot of parallels to the situation with Chris and Adriana. Tony claims that he's been doing good at controlling his anger as he mentions the run-in with the crack addicts earlier, and Melfi jokingly tells Tony to give her the same courtesy he would a crack addict, which Tony smiles at. He tells Melfi that he's still pissed at her for recommending the therapist to Meadow that convinced Meadow to nearly move to Barcelona, and Adriana watches Beat Rice videos while smoking and drinking as Chris enters the room, saying that he wants to be with Adriana to help her deal with her issues, reconciling the relationship, for now anyways. Chris pitches the idea of getting married in Vegas on their anniversary as Carm later tells Adriana that that's a stupid idea, excitedly saying that they could have it at their house and have Artie cater and whatnot. Adriana says she hasn't even told her mom this news yet as the show cuts to Maurice's guys pulling up to the crack house and start blasting, with the guy who was threatening Tony earlier getting his balls shot off while trying to escape. Maurice's guys fool around out of there upstairs, the brother and sister crawl out of the house, as this guy in the sidewalk delivers some words of wisdom.
I told you young people that crack is some bad shit.
Dr. Freed and Maurice get their mortgage loans approved, while Tony gives cousin Brian a $15,000 watch as a thank you for his earlier suggestion of this scam, which Brian is surprised by, as he didn't expect Tony to actually go through with it. Carm asks what's going on down there, as Brian says he's just borrowing a power tool, and Tony gives him a tool to bring with him before he leaves to secure the lie. Upstairs, Carm meets with Furio, who tells Carm that he needs to wait in the car instead of coming inside. And while Carm says that she wanted to see the housewarming photos, Furio goes no can do and walks away. Carm asks if Brian's doing work on his house, as Brian's like, huh? Oh, right, yeah, man. And Carm watches Brian walk out. Suspicious. Paulie and Johnny Sack have lunch together, where Paulie says that Tony never reached out to him once during his 4-month-long jail sentence, and how he's been treating him like this for a hot second now while rolling around in dough, mentioning the new real estate scam they've been pulling, which is news to Johnny. Adriana tries on some wedding dresses in front of her friend, and she mentions the spousal privilege law to her, but her friend says that it might not apply to her, saying that she was watching an episode of Murder, She Wrote, where this method backfired on one of the characters. Adriana later goes fucking and meets with a lawyer to figure out whether or not marriage would actually solve her issues. And he tells Adriana that, if the prosecutors wanted to testify, they're going to do everything to find a way. Silvio gives Zellman and Maurice their earnings, and Maurice notes Zellman's less than stellar attitude, with the two discussing their moral degradation over the years, essentially saying, hey, somebody's gonna do this eventually, so it might as well be us. Tony and the guys drink to celebrate the money rolling in, while Adriana celebrates her bridal shower at Carm's place, with Adriana much less enthused after realizing that her get-out-of-jail-free card has seemingly been revoked. Tony listens to a song by the Shy Lights on the radio while driving, the same one mentioned earlier in the episode by Maurice at the sauna, and it causes Tony to get emotional. He drives over to Zellman's house and makes his way into his room, and suddenly starts whipping Zellman with his belt while the song continues to play in the background. Despite what Tony said earlier about not minding Zellman's relationship with Irina, his true feelings of the situation erupt during this moment, with Tony only having one thing to say to Zellman before leaving.
Well, the girls in New Jersey, you had to fuck this one?
He looks at Irina for a moment before patting her on the cheek and leaving the house, ending the episode. Unsurprisingly, what he said about getting good at controlling his anger to Melfi was absolutely not the case. It's fascinating how much Tony cares for his exes from his past affairs, even though most of them have gone down in flames spectacularly. We were given a deep dive last episode into Tony's deep-rooted feelings of loss after learning of Gloria's death, and the end of this episode confirms that those feelings are not exclusive to Gloria, as Tony drunkenly beats the shit out of Zellman for getting in a serious relationship with Irina. The Irina ship might have sailed for Tony, but that doesn't make it immune to rogue waves. Anyways, this episode was pretty great. I love the Zellman-Maurice subplot as they help Tony and his crew along with a scheme, and Adriana's conflict with Chris was very entertaining to watch as well. It's funny how Adriana goes through with getting married with the belief that she'll have immunity because she watched a scene from a TV show, only for her to second guess herself when a friend informs her otherwise because she watched a scene from a TV show. Anyways, I like this episode a lot. This was apparently the final appearance of Assemblyman Zellman, which is kind of sad. I liked his character and performance quite a bit. I'm glad he was given a big subplot before getting his shit rocked. I'm feeling a solid 8 here for this one. Season 4, Episode 8, Mergers and Acquisitions. Carm gives Furio some coffee as Furio talks about flying down to Naples to visit his father with cancer, leaving Paulie with driving duties for Tony. He talks about his mom in the nursing home non-stop before Tony tells him to shut up, and the next day, Tony begins his plan he started a few episodes ago and calls Chris to give orders through him. And Chris rushes around through his drawer to find something to write them down with and hilariously starts writing on his pillow due to a lack of paper. Carm later stares at a painting of Vesuvio while the song her and Furio dance to plays in the background, and Carm asks Artie if they called the people who mugged him, which Artie doesn't respond to. Carm also asks Brian what they should do with the cash from the property in Newark, and Brian nearly blows their cover on the latest scheme before Tony intervenes and Carm elaborates, saying that she meant the abandoned warehouse from Uncle Junior, which Tony says was put into the trust. Carm and Rosalie help Father Phil with a diaper drive at the church, and they talk about their husbands being secretive with their earnings, with Rosalie saying that the money she was left behind with was sort of not really enough. And Carm says she feels uneasy with the way Tony's pulling people into a circle, likely referring to cousin Brian due to her suspicions from their encounter last episode. Tony meets Pyomai at the stables as Ralphie walks in with a new face, Valentina, an art gallery employee and Ralphie's new girlfriend. She makes a good first impression on Tony by tricking Ralphie into stepping in a horse shed, and Ralphie angrily leaves to clean his shoe while Valentina walks up to Tony and says that Tony can commission an artist from the art gallery to create a painted portrait of Pyomai, telling him to give her a call if he's interested, wink wink wink. Paulie helps his mother Nucci officially move into the Green Grove nursing home
Retirement community,
and meets with Cookie and Minnie, two of Nucci's longtime friends. However, as Nucci goes to take a shit, Cookie tells Paulie to inform Nucci not to sit at their table since they're already a set group, whatever that means. Paulie insists to Cookie that they can work things out as the show cuts to Tony enjoying his new movie theater room. He later falls asleep to Pink Floyd before waking up and switching over to a movie, and he looks at the card Valentina gave him, deciding to take up her offer. He tells the artist to keep him and Pie Oh My in the reference photo, but crop out stupid Ralphie. And he gives the payment to the artist before having a drink with Valentina. And the two start lightly flirting with each other before the show cuts to them playing Battleship in a hotel room. They eat afterwards as Valentina pulls another prank, loosening the cap on the salt shaker and making it spill all over Tony's food. And Tony gets his revenge by nearly throwing her food out the window unless Valentina gives him a kiss. And the two get back to fun, with Tony telling Valentina not to mention a word of this to Ralphie. Tony later buys some jewelry from a store for Valentina while writing a card that reads, "It was great while it lasted, sincerely Tony." And we're taken to Green Grove's casino night, where Nucci reveals herself to be an even worse blackjack player than Jackie Jr. as she hits on an 18, which Cookie rightfully chastises her for. Nucci ends up busting with a 6 as Cookie gets a 10 on a 15. And she gets pissed since she would have gotten to 21 if Nucci didn't hit and tells her to fuck off to the penny slots. Tony brushes his teeth as Carm hums the song that she and Furio dance to in the shower. The song is called Vesuvio, by the way. Isn't that funny? Tony decides to go the Valentina route and plays a prank on Carm, pouring cold water on her during her shower. But instead of brushing it off, she gets angry at Tony instead, saying that he promised not to do that same prank again on their honeymoon.
Do you remember promising me?
Yeah, so what?
So, this is one promise I would like you to keep.
Damn. Paulie meets with his buddy from high school, Chucky, who's now a high school principal, and talks about Chucky's mother, Cookie, excluding Nucci from her friend group, saying to talk with her about the situation, as Paulie wants to repay Nucci back for all the trouble he caused her during his childhood. Carmelo later goes through Tony's laundry, and a nail falls from his clothes onto the floor, the same nail that Valentina lost when messing around with Tony. And she throws his shit across the room in anger, reopening the wound of Tony cheating on her, despite earlier telling Rosalie that she's become at peace with the situation. Tony talks with a crew at a restaurant and gets pissed at Silvio and Chris for rearranging negotiations since it'll put more work on Tony's plate. And Ralphie shows up to dinner with Valentina, who Tony secretly meets with. She gives back the jewelry to Tony and asks why her and Tony can't still be a thing. And Tony says A, he doesn't want to fuck his friend's girlfriend, which is a little too late for that. And B, he doesn't want to be where Ralphie has been, which is also a little too late for that. Valentina says that Ralphie and her rarely fuck since Ralphie is a weird sex pervert, but Tony ignores her and says have a nice life. Carmela is still enraged by Tony seeing other women despite his myriad of promises in the past to stay faithful, and decides to take revenge on him by trying to break open the lock in the backyard that she waltzed upon him next to earlier this season. The next day, Valentina calls Tony and vents to him about Ralphie's weird battleship preferences, like having her drip candle wax on his nuts and rubbing his raw wiener with a cheese grater. Man, there's gotta be easier ways to deal with dick cheese. Yeah, that one wasn't even clever, I'm sorry. Tony hangs up and asks Silvio and Patsy if Ralphie is weird about women, a pretty hilarious question considering that he killed one that one time. And Silvio brings up this incident, forgetting why Ralphie did that in the first place. Going back to what I said in the season 3 video about these mafia guys being sociopaths and acting like Ralphie forgot to take the garbage out and not that he murdered someone. Tony talks to Melfi about his affair with Valentina, with Melfi calling Ralphie a cuck, which makes me giggle. And Tony tries getting some answers to Ralphie's strange sexual behavior by vaguely describing his actions, with Melfi describing Ralphie as a full-blown masochist, saying that these fetishes stem from childhood and that Ralphie's mother likely only showed love through abuse. Tony calls Valentina to see if they can hook up again, but the show cuts to clips of her and Ralphie being lovey-dovey, implying that Tony doesn't want to fuck that up any further as he hangs up. Carm watches a news piece about a woman not having much financial involvement in the relationship, while Tony sings Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd in the shower.
We don't need no control.
And while he's distracted, Carm goes into the backyard and takes a stack of money out of the big bag of birdseed. Nucci tells Paulie that Cookie and Minnie are being mean to her, and Paulie says he'll do something about it, while Furio attends his father's funeral in Naples, talking with his father's brother about being in love with Carm despite her being married to Tony. And the brother tells Furio to stay far the hell away from Carm, and that the only way Furio could realistically have her is if he killed Tony. Back in New Jersey, Carm watches a television segment taking place in Naples and starts daydreaming about Furio while Vesuvio plays in the background. And Ralphie talks to Tony about Valentina, claiming that the battleship sessions with her are really good. And Ralphie gives Adriana some shit before Adriana gives Ralphie some shit right back. Tony tries to get digging into Ralphie's childhood, and Ralphie only says that his mother had her demanding ways before leaving. Paulie talks to the head of Green Grove, demanding answers as to why Nucci is being mistreated, and she she tells Paulie that Nucci is kind of the root of every single one of her problems, mentioning her being a crybaby and a tattletale, which makes Paulie realize that he's got some work to do. Tony once again gives his orders through Chris via payphone, but gets interrupted by Valentina, who convinces Tony to meet her again. Chucky kills 2 people trying to run away from Paulie's guys at the school, and Valentina meets Tony at a bar, saying that she broke up with Ralphie and that Tony can now spend time with her without worry. However, Tony says that he can't, saying that he's a married man despite playing Battleship with her like 30 minutes ago, and also lists another reason as to why.
Why? Why not?
For one thing, I already took his horse.
Valentina angrily leaves the restaurant as Carm deposits the birdseed money in the stocks, and Tony reconsiders spending some time with Valentina before meeting with Janice, asking her about Ralphie's Battleship life. Janice tries claiming that she's above betraying confidences like that before bribing Tony for $3,000, and she tells him that Ralphie likes getting dominated and how he physically cannot get hard when playing a regular round of Battleship. Speaking of which, the show cuts to Tony playing a regular game of Battleship with Valentina, and later finds out that somebody's been mooching off his birdseed money. Chucky's wife demands Cookie to stop being such a to Nucci since his son is getting his ass kicked over it. And while Cookie claims that she deserves to not have to be nice to someone, Chucky's wife threatens to move her to another retirement community.
Retirement community.
Not this time. Tony spots Valentina's nail on his nightstand, making him realize that Carm might be the prime suspect regarding the missing birdseed money, but decides not to make any direct confrontations just yet, instead asking Carm and AJ if anybody's been snooping around the backyard recently while Carm makes him coffee. Tony stares at Carm as she asks Tony if he's sure there's nothing that he wants to discuss, and the two sit around in the kitchen quietly as the show fades to black, ending the episode. Man, these past few episodes, we've been getting to know a lot more about Tony and his affairs, from old ones to new ones. I'm sure this won't have a massive payoff by the end of the season or anything. Anyways, another pretty good episode. This episode unfortunately kind of peaked when Chris wrote down Tony's orders on his pillow sheet, but the rest of the episode is still decent. The stuff with Tony and Valentina was pretty good, especially when the plotline splintered off into Tony snooping around to find out more about Ralphie's unhinged sexual urges. In retrospect, asking your own sister how she played Battleship with her ex is insane, and doing it for $3,000 is even insaner. The moments of Carmela's infatuation with Furio was also pretty great as well. That stupid song is gonna be stuck in my head while I make this video. Paulie helping his mom out is also very nice to see, even if it involves breaking a limb or two of a close friend. I completely forgot about that moment on rewatch, by the way, so watching the principal of the school literally shove his own students to the wall made me laugh my ass off. I'm feeling a decent beat here on this one. Man, we're 8 episodes deep into season 4 and we haven't even got one S tier yet. That's the longest streak of any season so far by a long shot. I expect this streak will continue into the next episode. Season 4, episode 9. Whoever did this. I spoke too soon. Junior falls down and dies. Meanwhile, Tony takes Carm to the stables to show her Pyomai, and Junior lies in a hospital bed as the doctor checks whether or not he has a concussion, and Junior's lawyer says he's gonna catch a flight and leave.
Feel better.
Make sure Beppy gets my chicken home.
Corrado, you didn't get to the early bird special.
Junior having memory issues? Man, I sure hope he gets better. The doctor tells Tony that Junior might have dementia and theorizes that it might have been building up in his brain for a while, saying that the blow he took earlier that day caused it to tip over and that they want to keep him in the hospital in case of a worst case scenario. Meanwhile, Ralphie theorizes that it might have been Paulie who leaked the Ginny fat joke to Johnny due to their recent feuds, and realizes that little Paulie was the one who told the joke to Paulie. Ralphie gets revenge by prank calling Paulie's mother under the pseudonym Detective Mike and informs poor Nucci that Paulie was caught playing Battleship with a Cub Scout while the gerbil was up his ass. Vito, Gene, and Ralphie laugh their asses off while Tony visits Junior in the hospital, where Junior says he's milking this injury for all it's worth. Tony decides to milk Junior harder and calls his lawyer, saying that they might have a mistrial on their hands due to this injury, as Ralphie's kids play with a bow and arrow in the backyard. This predictably goes wrong very quickly as Ralphie's maid shouts that Justin's been hurt very badly, and Ralphie rushes into the backyard and finds Justin lying on the ground with an arrow in his chest. And the show cuts to the hospital, where we witness Ralphie in one of his most vulnerable states in the entire show. He tells Tony in a state of shock that Justin wasn't able to get oxygen to his brain for 5 minutes. And Ralphie's ex-wife chastises him for letting their kids run amok without supervision before the two of them along with their husbands start fighting each other. And one of Ralphie's kids decides that this is a great time to intervene.
We were just fooling around.
Just fooling around?
Just fooling around.
Suddenly, a car drives into the hospital and pulls everybody inside, and that's how the story ends. Thanks for watching. Back in the actual show, Ralphie cries while Tony holds him against the wall. And later, Junior's lawyer and Tony tell Junior that they'll be using Junior's newly found mental degradation to their advantage, saying they'll be giving Junior 24/7 nursing care due to his potential dementia, and that all Junior has to do is play it up. And that, if the plan works, the court will find the trial unable to proceed, and that his charges will either be dropped or delayed, which pleases Junior. Meanwhile, less than pleased Ralphie looks at Justin as Rosalie visits Ralphie in the hospital. And Ralphie actually apologizes to Rosalie for his behavior, saying that he only now understands what Rosalie was going through during Jackie Jr.'s death, as Rosalie accepts his apology. It's very similar to how Tony was only able to understand the impact that his actions can have on people when the same event happens to himself, like with Jackie Aprile Sr.'s death or Gloria's suicide. It's a pretty big character moment for Ralphie, as he's basically been nothing but a psychotic, manipulative pot stirrer up to this point in the show. So to watch him display, like, actual, genuine empathy along with reflection on his own behavior is really surprising. As a result of this, Rosalie tries her best to make Ralphie feel better.
Justin's gonna be all right, Ralph. You'll see. He's gonna be fine. He's gonna be a vegetable.
Carmela gossips about Artie nearly overdosing on sleeping pills and him and Tony having a rough time while smiling and waving at him. And Tony and Bobby help Junior practice being crazy for the upcoming assessment with a nurse, which Junior finds humiliating, mentioning how his late brother Eckley, the guy we found out about back in season 2, was made fun of for being mentally deficient. Janice answers the door to the nurse as well as Svetlana, and Janice tries claiming that she's a changed woman after the whole haha got your leg incident before Svetlana tells her to fuck off. Janice cries and walks away for some reason as Ralphie meets with Father and Tintola, who bemoans the fact that he's done terrible things in his life, and yet his son is the person who has to pay for it, saying that this is how God is punishing him. Tintola says that God has a plan for everything. It doesn't just punish people before asking if Ralphie would like to make a confession, and Ralphie says he needs a bit more time, crying to himself while Tintola prays. Carmela later tells Tony about Ralphie's sudden streak of goodwill, saying that he's opened up a Rutgers scholarship in Jackie Jr.'s name, along with attempting to make amends with Rosalie by marrying her, which didn't work for obvious reasons, and also mentions the meeting with Tintola we just saw. Tony is surprised by this as he starts playing rough with AJ, appreciating the time of the son and the off chance he also gets hit with an arrow, and later talks with Ralphie at the Big, who talks to Tony about how guilty he feels over the whole situation. He confesses that he was in Florida high on coke on Justin's 7th birthday, and that he forgot to call him wishing a happy birthday, which causes Ralphie to start sobbing. Tony walks over to comfort him and asks if Ralphie's covered money-wise, and Ralphie says he'll do whatever it takes to keep Justin healthy. Tony decides that Ralphie grieving over his son is the perfect time to tell him that he's seeing Valentina, and Ralphie doesn't say anything about this, only patting Tony on the cheek and saying he's going back to the hospital. Tony suggests seeing Pyomai to take Ralphie's Pyo mind off of things, but Ralphie denies this and says that he wishes he could have met someone like Carmela instead of his now ex-wife before leaving. While the crew gives their sympathy to Ralphie, Paulie refuses to do so, saying that he's still a piece of shit and that he was the one who prank called Nucci, claiming that she was given a Xanax just so she could sleep that night. He contemplates murdering Ralphie before Tony threatens him not to lay a finger or Paulie will have to answer to him, which Paulie reluctantly obliges. Junior purposefully does terrible on his assessment as Tony gets a call while in bed with Valentina, and finds out that Pyomai was killed in a fire at the stables. He rushes over and learns that a fire was started due to a broken light bulb, and watches as Pyomai's corpse is dragged away by a tractor. Tony goes over to Ralphie's house and informs him of this bad news, and Ralphie offers Tony some eggs and coffee in the kitchen. Ralphie changes the subject and tells Tony that Justin will be able to walk and talk after years of rehab, but Tony brushes this off, saying that Pyomai was burned so badly that they killed her to put her out of her misery. Ralphie asks what kind of sicko would do something like that, and Tony's like, yeah, what sick fuck? Mentioning the very convenient timing of this incident. He subtly accuses Ralph of intentionally setting fire to the stable so he could collect a $200,000 insurance policy they had put on Pyomai. Ralphie tries telling Tony that the people said it was an accident as Tony asks how Corky Iannucci's been doing lately, the guy who helped Silvio with blowing up Artie's restaurant in the pilot episode. And Ralphie claims that he and Tony simply got lucky while also proclaiming that Pyomai was no good anyway. Said she always had issues that would take her 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Tony becomes convinced that Ralphie killed Pyomai as Ralphie yells that he didn't, while also saying that Pyomai was lame anyway and that his money is better off helping Justin in the hospital. He also points out that Tony's a hypocrite, saying that Tony never has any concerns like this whenever Ralphie brings him his earnings, and decides to slip in one last fat joke to push Tony over the edge.
Don't give me that look. It was a fucking horse. What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the fucking carload.
In one of the best and most intense fight scenes of the show, Ralphie and Tony beat the shit out of each other, with Tony smashing Ralphie in the glass while Ralphie shoots bug spray into Tony's eyes. Eventually, Tony wrestles Ralphie to the floor, angrily lamenting Pyomai's loss and blaming Ralphie for the fire.
The beautiful innocent creature, what did she ever do to you?
Tony smashes Ralphie's head against the floor and chokes him to death, and cleans himself off while realizing that he's got some other cleaning to do. Despite a lot of shit that I give Ralphie, he is far and away one of my favorite characters to watch throughout the series. In a show full of terrible people who do terrible things, none of them stand out quite like Ralphie does. Some fans have gone as far as to theorize that Ralphie is an incarnation of the devil himself because of just how evil he is. He instigates, he murders, and he hurts the people around him, be it close friends or mere acquaintances, all seemingly with a smile on his face and without a shred of remorse or guilt. He is such a fascinating character to watch purely because of how unadulteratingly despicable he is. I wouldn't go as far as to label him a foil to Tony, since that would imply that Tony is somehow the good guy in this show, but even Tony has his good qualities that Ralphie completely and utterly lacks, particularly his empathy and love toward animals. This episode features what is easily one of the most insightful deep dives into Ralphie's character, as we're shown that, despite the evil he's capable of, Ralphie was still able to feel empathy and remorse for what he's done, as he deals with the fallout of his son being hospitalized. It's kind of funny how the show demonstrates that Ralphie was capable of change right before killing him off, at the hands of his own boss Tony Soprano no less. It's interesting how Tony and Ralphie both went through pretty similar arcs this season, both encountering tragic events in their life and navigating it by trying to make up for their sins by doing good deeds. You'd think Tony would be able to recognize that Ralphie's going through a somewhat similar situation, but instead, he decides to kill off one of his best earners under the impression that Ralphie killed a fucking horse. Speaking of which, the death of Pyomai is another one of those things that the show decides to leave the viewer interpretation, as we never get a true confirmation as to whether or not Ralphie was actually behind her death. Now, on the one hand, this is Ralphie we're talking about. This is the same guy who killed Tracy and wants his dick rubbed with a cheese grater. He also told Tony at the Bing that he'd do anything, financially speaking, to help Justin recover from his injuries. He's also never been that fond of Pyomai anyway, so it's not like it would have been a huge loss for him. You know, typing all of this, it really seems pretty fucking obvious that Ralphie did it. On the other hand, though, Ralphie has been on something of a redemption arc up to the point where he got killed by Tony in this episode. He knows for a fact that Tony cares a lot about Pyomai. He was the one who told his maid to call Tony when Pyomai was sick and needed money for the vet quickly. He not only knew for a fact that he'd get blowback from Tony, but he also knew how much that would hurt Tony. I'm not saying that Ralphie was instantly redeemed and suddenly turned into a saint this episode, but, like, it makes sense if Ralphie never actually killed Pyomai. My take on the whole situation? Personally, I think that Ralphie didn't kill Pyomai. I mean, the guy's got a kid in the hospital that he feels tremendous remorse for. You really think he's got time to go out and burn down a stable? He's certainly done a lot of terrible things in the past, but considering the direction his character went in this episode, I'm inclined to lean toward the Ralphie Pyomai truther side. Hashtag Ralphie did nothing wrong. Anyways, back to the episode. In a case of really bad timing, Chris takes some heroin right before Tony calls him up, telling him to call him back on a payphone. Half an hour later, Chris calls him back, and Tony tells him to get some body disposing materials before heading to Ralphie's place. And Chris walks in all heroin-like. He's shocked to find Ralphie's body on the floor as Tony tells him while wearing his blood-stained shirt that he found Ralphie like this. He claims the blood came from trying to move his body earlier and that they need to get rid of the body so there won't be any major investigation, saying they've already got enough eyes on them with Junior's trial, and Tony realizes that Chris is high as a kite.
I smoked half a joint before you called. I'm fine.
Look at you. Your nose is running, you fucking junkie. You promised me you wouldn't do that shit anymore.
I didn't.
Chris says that people might wonder what happened to Ralphie before Tony says whatever and helps Chris carry his body into the tub. And Chris confesses that he snorted a little H before making an insane discovery.
Ah! Holy shit. I had no idea, did you?
Of course I did. You're so high on skag, you wouldn't know if he had your mother's muff on his head.
I remember being shocked by this moment the first time I watched this show a few years back. In my defense, I hadn't seen The Matrix up to that point. Chris later tells Tony while taking a break from the body disposing about having kids with Adriana, and Tony tells him that he can't be taking heroin while having kids, which is a good point. Chris later tells Tony that he's sorry about Pyomai's death and asks what Tony thinks happened to her, which you can probably guess what he thinks about the matter. And they place this incredibly realistic and not fake head along with various other body parts into a case. They carry Ralphie's body into a river while Tony warns Chris not to go down the road of drug addiction, and they heave-ho that sucker into the icy waters below. They later head up to Mikey Palmisi's father's farm to bury the leftover chopped up body parts of Ralphie, and they find a backhoe to dig up the ground due to it being frozen solid. Tony claims that he's able to drive these since his grandfather let him fuck around in this construction site when he was a wee lad. And they head back to the Bing, with Chris saying that people could take Ralph getting whacked the wrong way. But Tony tells him that he and Chris are the only ones who know about this. They shower off all the blood and guts before burning their clothes out back. And the next day, Junior continues feigning his mental degradation by asking his neighbor for ice cream. And the nurse forces him back inside while Tony sleeps in the Bing. And he wakes up yelling for Christopher before staring at a photo of Tracy on the mirror. He continues calling for Christopher before walking outside, and the episode ends on a literal bright note. This whole second half of the episode is so unique compared to the rest of the show. We're given a long segment of Tony and Chris meticulously getting rid of Ralphie's corpse while discussing their personal lives. It's such a fantastic segment that stuck with me for the longest time. Everything about it, from the acting to the writing, does such a great job at conveying the exhaustion that the two feel by the end of it all. I also love when Tony stares at the photo of Tracy near the end of the episode. It's a great detail that hints to the audience that Tony's murder of Ralphie may not have just been motivated by Pyomai's death, but of another innocent creature that Tony chastises Ralphie for murdering.
That was a beautiful innocent creature. What did she ever do to you?
Everything else about this episode is simply fantastic as well. The material with Ralphie in this episode is some of the best that he's given in any appearance of the show, and I can't believe I've gone so long without saying, but Joe Pantoliano does such an unbelievable acting job as Ralph Cifaretto in this episode as well as the whole show. He's normally extremely good at playing this malicious psychopath, but he does an exceptionally amazing job in this episode as Ralphie's subjected to the near death of his son Justin. He ended up securing an Emmy for this episode, which was 100% deserved. For Christopher too? The fuck did he do in that episode? Junior's material is also pretty fantastic, and I'd argue that the episode peaked with him falling down 40 flights of stairs in the first 2 minutes, if not for literally everything else that happens in this episode. James Gandolfini also does a particularly amazing job. The anger that he displays when Tony's murdering Ralphie is so raw and primal. It's like watching a cheetah bite off the head of a gazelle. This episode has always stuck out in my mind when thinking about this show, and for very, very good reason. It is simply a terrific hour of television. Turns out I was right earlier, by the way. This episode is not getting an S tier. It's getting a double S tier. By a weird technicality, Season 4's streak of 0 S tiers is still going. Let's see if it'll last. Season 4, Episode 10. The Strong Silent Type.
He was gay, Gary Cooper?
The episode opens up with Chris watching Beat Rice videos while injecting heroin. And he accidentally sits on Little Cassette while she sleeps on the couch. There was nothing we could do. Chris was a made man and Cassette wasn't. Carmela preps up her 18th hairstyle this season and opens up the door to who she hopes is Furio, which it isn't. Tony walks over to see Benny before pointing out that Carm cut her hair short and is like, okay, cool, and walks out the door. Adriana comes back home, but Chris dozed off on the couch as she calls for Cassette. And she quickly realizes that Chris's fat ass sat on her while he was high.
Oh my god! She's dead!
I fell asleep.
What?
She must have crawled under there for warmth.
Are you fucking crazy?
Chris acts like he spilled salsa on the couch and not that he just killed something, saying it was just an accident as Adriana cries in her room. Tony plays pool with the crew while being like, wow, I haven't heard from Ralphie in forever. What about you guys? And Chris walks in while Tony calls Ralphie's number, with Tony and Chris giving each other a knowing glance. Tony looks around through his stuff and finds the painting he got commissioned of him and Pyomai, which causes Tony to angrily leave the Bing. He later calls Silvio in the car to burn that picture and that he never wants to see it again. And we get more totally not stock footage of a plane landing, indicating Furio's re-arrival to America. Silvio, Patsy, and Albert Barisi discuss Ralphie's disappearance, with Albert theorizing that Tony might be behind it somehow. Albert says that Tony whacking Ralphie over his horse means that anyone in his crew could be whacked over anything.
If Tony did do this, whack Ralph over a fucking horse, that guy'd be the first guy online to pull his fucking plug.
There's no way that wasn't intentional. Tony watches over Justin in the hospital knowing that he killed his father for funsies and gives Ralphie's ex some money. And Carm and Furio finally meet again and make googly eyes. And he gives her some gifts from Naples before heading into the car, much to Carm's disappointment. There were gifts for Meadow and AJ, but none for Carmela, also much to Carm's disappointment. And Furio cries to himself in the car before driving Tony. He claims that he's sad for his father's death before Tony says that he's gotta get over it. And the show hilariously hard cuts to Tony crying in therapy about the painting of him and Pyomai, and describes himself as the sad clown, which he also described himself in the first episode of the show. And Melfi points out that Tony usually responds to these emotions with rage rather than humor, as Tony says that he's doubling his daily Prozac dosage, which Melfi says is a great idea and that he should go even higher than that. In the actual episode, Melfi points out that Tony's grief for animals significantly outweighs the grief he feels for human beings, pointing out that the only other other time he's gotten this emotional during a session was when the Ducks left his pool. And Tony rants about how it feels like the whole world is going to shit, mentioning Justin getting hit with an arrow along with Christopher having a drug problem, and says he wishes that everyone could just get along. Deeming the notion ridiculous, as Melfi says that it's probably because Tony causes immense suffering himself every day, which Tony doesn't respond to. Adriana talks to Agent San Severino and complains that Chris is constantly getting high off of heroin, and she tells Adriana that she needs to convince Chris to go to rehab as a car pulls up with a dog happily barking out the window before pulling it in reverse, making Adriana bawl her eyes out as she's reminded of Crush Cassette, Little Cassette. Silvio calls Chris to hurry up with the deliveries as Paulie asks what the hell Tony's problem was with the painting, and Chris decides to pick up some heroin before the delivery, which turns out to be a huge mistake as the drug dealers steal his car and beat the piss out of him.
Oh, God damn it.
What?
Piece of shit, the cork, and it's stuck in a bottle. Homemade crap.
Oh my crap. Tony talks about poor Justin while Carm gets distracted by the wine Furio brought them from Italy. Those distractions not being a one-time thing as Tony reveals that Carm forgot to take a whole ass baby out of the turkey. Tony talks to Carm's parents about his horse dying as nobody really gives a shit. And Chris comes back to the apartment all fucked up while this guy Eddie says that Chris owes him $30 for the ride. And Adriana kicks him out of the place. Adriana tries recommending rehab to Chris, and Chris politely says that he doesn't want to go. Just kidding, he punches Adriana in the face for merely recommending this idea. Leaving the apartment as Adriana cries on the floor. The next day, Paulie swipes the painting of Tony and Pyomai before it gets torched as Adriana visits Tony's place, telling him about Chris's addiction as Carm pitches the idea of planning an intervention. Tony says he'll try and figure something out as Paulie hangs Tony's painting in his home, weirdly satisfied. Carmela forces AJ to come along with her to another trip to Furio's, and AJ gets bored and leaves to the cars. Furio says he feels bad for not getting a gift for Carm, saying he left it back in Naples as he gives her an alternative, a jar of finely aged balsamic vinegar. He talks to Carm about how he felt like a tourist to his own hometown in Naples, while also saying that he feels like he doesn't quite fit in America either. And Carm's like, well, at least you have a girlfriend, right? And Furio says he doesn't anymore as Carm goes, wow, that's really interesting, as AJ comes inside and kills the vibe before anything insane and crazy happens. Tony arrives at Junior's house as Svetlana types on her product placement, and her, Tony, and Furio drink some of Furio's wine while waiting for Junior to wake up from his Betty Bye time. Svetlana and Tony talk about Svetlana's life, and Tony says that her husband's a very lucky man while Paulie cleans his apartment, and he looks over at the painting of Tony all creeped out, with the show zooming in on Tony's eyes. Tony talks to Junior about Chris and his addiction as Junior suggests just putting him out of his misery and killing him, saying that Chris could blab to the feds if they catch him at the wrong time. But Tony considers not doing that and instead something like an intervention. Carm talks to Rosalie about her love of Furio and how she lives for the few minutes when she talks with him. And while Rosalie warns her what'll happen if Tony catches a whiff of this, Carmela says that her love for Furio is real and that she feels like her life is slipping through her fingers. Rosalie still says that she should let this love go as Carm doesn't let it go. And the crew meets with Dominic, a recovering addict who was once a burglar for the Soprano crew, to plan their intervention for Christopher. Tony fools around over to Johnny's sack, and Johnny asks for a cut of the profits from the HUD scam, not mentioning that Paulie brought this to his attention. And Tony says that he's not cutting Johnny into any more deals, mentioning him giving Johnny a cut of the abandoned warehouse property before storming out of there. Paulie talks to an artist to try and revamp the painting to make it more Napoleon, and Tony talks with the crew about Ralph, theorizing that Ralphie might have been taken out by somebody in New York due to an issue regarding a deal in the HUD scam, which is a hilariously petty cover-up given the fact that Tony literally just talked to Johnny about this. Tony tells the crew to keep their eyes peeled as we cut to one of my all-time favorite Soprano scenes, Christopher's intervention. It starts off fine enough at first, with Adriana talking about the fact that she and Chris don't play Battleship as often because of his heroin use, and mentions Chris killing Little Cassette, which predictably enrages animal enthusiast Tony in particular. Asking what he did that for, as Paulie asks if it was barking like that's an acceptable reason to kill your dog. Bad dog, bad! Dominic tells Tony to calm down and lets Silvio deliver this incredible speech.
When I came in to open up one morning, there you were with your head half in the toilet. Your hair was in the toilet water. Disgusting.
I told you I had the flu.
I said my piece, Chrissy.
Tony gets hung up on Chris killing Cassette, saying that he knows what it's like to lose a pet. And Carmela mentions Chris being high at Livia's wake, saying that he was rambling on about clones and shit. And Tony chastises Chris for doing this as if anyone likes Livia. Paulie calls Chris an embarrassment to everyone around him as Chris starts attacking everyone, mentioning Silvio playing Battleship with the Bing strippers along with the incident with the Russian down at Pine Barrens with Paulie. And Paulie walks over and tells Chris to shut his face.
Paulie, sit down.
You're talking to the boss here.
Good, maybe someone will smack some goddamn sense into him.
Great, my own mother. Fuck you, you fucking whore.
Son of a...
This This scene is pure comedy gold. I love how they beat the shit out of Chris for calling his mother a whore while also calling him a son of a bitch. They later take Chris to the hospital under the guise that he slipped while using bug spray. And Tony angrily chastises Chris for his actions, saying that he trusted Chris to be the leader of this family and that the only reason Chris is alive right now is because they're family. He tells Chris that he's going to be attending rehab in Pennsylvania, and Chris cries to himself, asking how he let himself get to this. Tony visits Junior's place again and runs into Svetlana and has a drink with her while talking to her about Christopher. Tony says that he was thinking about Svetlana on the way over, saying that she's always smiling about something despite having it less fortunate in life. And Svetlana sarcastically says that she only exists to inspire people, saying that Americans complain despite having everything and that they have more time to think about themselves. However, Svetlana starts pointing out the positive qualities in Tony, saying that he's big and strong, as Tony says that Svetlana is beautiful as the two start playing Battleship with each other. Chris gets admitted into rehab, and they let Chris keep his cigarettes, but none of his chocolate bars or anything caffeine related, which is kind of weird considering that cigarettes can kill you, but whatever. Chris says goodbye to Adriana, and Adriana cries while leaving as Tony tells Svetlana that he'll see her when he can before her husband comes back. But Svetlana says that he shouldn't, saying that she's got her own problems to worry about. Later that night, Furio listens to Italian pop music while sitting on a chair, thinking about Carmela as we cut to Tony yelling out for Carmela before finding a note saying that she's at a hotel. We're given a brief scene contrasting the differences between Furio and Tony, as Furio makes himself an elegant dinner while Tony heats up some shit in the microwave. All the while, Paulie hangs up a new and improved version of the painting, with Tony wearing a Napoleon outfit. And Paulie sits down before looking back at the painting once more, and the show zooms in on Tony's eyes as the episode draws to a close. This was a fantastic episode. The absolute cream of the crop of this episode is, of course, the intervention scene. Paulie earnestly asking,
"What was it, barking?"
along with Silvio's half-hearted attempt at appealing the pathos before going,
"I said my piece, Chrissy."
Still get the biggest fucking belly laughs out of me. And we're given the second episode in a row where a fat joke made at Tony's expense eventually leads into complete chaos.
What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the fucking carload.
We are here to talk about you killing yourself with drugs, not my fucking personality.
That's right. I'm gonna kill myself? The way you fucking eat, you're gonna have a heart attack by the time you're 50.
Everything else about this episode was pretty great as well. Paulie's weird admiration of the painting of Tony with Pyomai is so funny, it's so ominous, what with Paulie constantly looking back at it like it's about to jump off the wall and kill him. It's weird because Paulie spent a majority of his screen time this season complaining that he's not getting nearly enough respect that he deserves, and yet he dips into his own bank account to add more details to a painting of his boss to make him seem even more like a confident leader. Furio and Carmela going through this star-crossed lovers arc is really intriguing to watch. They never once say a word in person about the love that they feel for one another, and yet they both know deep down that they love each other. It's really fascinating to watch, and I love how the show uses that scene near the end of the episode, comparing and contrasting Tony and Furio's lifestyles to give the audience a glimpse into what Carmela sees in Furio. That's my interpretation anyway. This episode has officially broken the streak for the longest amount of episodes without an S tier, as I'm giving this episode a very solid S tier. Fly high, little cassette. Season 4, Episode 11, Calling All Cars. Whoa, did you guys see that? The episode opens up on another dream sequence, with a song called Tears of a Clown playing in the background, referencing Tony's earlier quote of feeling like a sad clown to Melfi. Sounds of violence and screaming play from the radio as Tony notices Carmela driving the car next to Ralphie, who has a caterpillar crawling on his head. Tony hears Gloria ask if he wants to take the car for a test drive, and Ralphie and Carm look back at Tony, with Carmela's hair changing from long to short, and Tony looks back at Gloria to see her replaced by Svetlana, and the caterpillar changes into a butterfly before Tony jolts awake. Normally I'd explain my interpretation of the dream right after it happens, but we gotta wait a little longer cause it's Melfi time. Tony and Melfi sit in silence, with Melfi trying to get a conversation going by asking for elaboration of Tony's earlier sad clown line. But Tony ignores this before talking about his dream, describing it to her in detail. He mentions that the car he was in was similar to his father's old Cadillac, saying that it was hot and stuffy and that they never seemed to get anywhere when they were driving, comparing that to these therapy sessions, which Tony claims also aren't going anywhere. Melfi asks if the caterpillar on Ralphie's head represented Ralphie changing, which Tony says is not the case, and Melfi points out that Carmela is in control during the dream, theorizing that Tony wants to square the issues of Ralphie and his Gumars to Carmela. But Tony gets angry at Melfi, saying that therapy is dumb and that it's never helped him with any issues in the past, to which Melfi points out that it significantly helped Tony Tony to deal with his depression and his panic attacks. Before we continue on, let's go back to Tony's dream. I personally believe that the dream is a warning from Tony's subconscious that significant changes are going to be taking place in Tony's life in the near future, as change is a very consistent theme in the dream. The passenger next to Tony changes from Gloria to Svetlana, Carmela's hair changes from traditional long hair to a shorter cut, and of course, the bug on Ralphie's head changes from a caterpillar to a butterfly, one of the most iconic changes in nature. You could even speculate that Ralphie himself represents change, as he went from being alive 2 episodes ago to not that, along with the fact that he's not wearing his usual wig. Tony also mentions to Melfi that the car was similar to his father's and that he wouldn't stand for it if he saw Carm driving, saying that men sit in the front while the wives are in the back, yet another change included by Tony's subconscious. Carmela being the fooling around her of the car is likely Tony's brain's way of saying that these changes are going to involve Carmela heavily in some fashion, as Melfi says that she's the one in control during the dream. And the hot and stuffy atmosphere Tony described in the car may represent these supposed changes being an uncomfortable readjustment to his life. Anyways, back to the episode. Bobby tells his daughter Sophie to get her jacket from the car, and she lifts open a box, revealing a cake with a loving message written on top from Bobby. And Bobby later buries this cake at Karen's grave, saying that he wouldn't be alive right now if it weren't for his children. Later, Tony meets with Carmine and Johnny, who demand 40% of the profits of the HUD scam. And Tony says wah no, as Carmine asks where the hell Ralphie's been. And Tony's like, I don't know, you tell me. Pushing the lie that he told his crew last episode about how Ralphie's death may have been done by someone in the New York crew. Janice, Bobby, and the kids have an Outback Steakhouse dinner, and Bobby suddenly runs upstairs, with Janice following him up a few minutes later. She says that his daughter mentioned the cake in the back of his car, and Bobby says he buried it at Karen's grave, noting that today was their 14th anniversary. And Janice goes, oh, you think you have it bad? I had to pay $30 for sides at Outback. Bobby says he visits her grave every day since he misses talking to her, and Janice tells Bobby that she could tell him to suck it up and move on, but that she's not going to. You know, tell him to suck it up and move on. Tony later calls Johnny and Carmine and says he can agree to the deal as long as they can go from a 40% cut to a 5.5%. But they tell Tony to tickle their balls as Tony hangs up. And Sophia asks Bobby Jr. why Bobby got Karen a cake, along with the fact that a kid at school said Karen is going to come back to haunt the Baccaliaries as a ghost. And Bobby Jr. says there's no such thing as ghosts before hiding himself under the sheets the moment Sophia leaves. Paulie talks with Johnny about the situation, with Johnny suggesting that something bad could happen to Tony if this gets out of hand. And Paulie thanks Johnny for letting him blow off steam, saying that he only wants to make relations with the two families stable despite causing like 90% of Tony's issues this season. Tony heads to Junior's place to discuss the case as Tony realizes that Junior has shaving cream all over the side of his face. And Tony suggests finding out where the jurors meet so they can use them to their advantage. But Junior says he doesn't want to talk about it as the show cuts to Janice and Carm talking about Bobby and his grieving of Karen. And Carm tells AJ that he's going to hang out with Bobby Jr. on Sunday and that he's going to like it. Lupertazzi family associate Joey and this other guy beat the shit out of the appraiser and demand him to work for Johnny and Carmine. And Tony later claims to the crew that this is just a bluff and that they aren't really going to be setting up a different HUD scam. Tony comes up with the idea of getting Beansy involved since he communicates with little Carmine often, the son of the other Carmine. And the Baccaliaries have dinner with the Sopranos, with AJ immediately being a bad influence on Bobby Jr.
You want an artichoke, Bobby Jr.?
No.
It's dinner time.
You sure, BJ?
Come on, don't call him BJ. Beansy calls Tony later that night and arranges a meeting with him and little Carmine down in Miami. And Carm forces AJ to stop making out with Devin so that he can play with Bobby Jr. and Sophia. Carm suggests picking out a game to play with them, and AJ decides this to be the perfect time to pull out the Ouija board. And Sophia starts asking questions about Karen before Devin decides that this might be a bad idea. However, AJ suggests the idea of contacting the dead for real in another Martin Scorsese-like zoom in. And Tony and Silvio discuss the meeting in Miami as well as Paulie, theorizing that Paulie is the one causing all this trouble between Tony and New York. AJ holds a mock seance with Devin and the kids, and claims that a sea captain is talking to him, saying that he predicts a huge storm about to take place as he reaches down to grab a wet sponge, and he squeezes it over Bobby Jr., which goes well.
She's here!
Oh, Jesus.
Tony and everyone else bust down the doors. Sophia yells that AJ was being a dick to them. And Bobby Jr. starts beating up AJ before Bobby takes him and Sophia out of the house, with Carm apologizing for AJ's assholishness as Bobby Jr. mentions when AJ locked him in Furio's garage. The poor appraiser gets beat up again, this time by Tony's guys, who demand him to appraise Tony's houses now. And Janice talks to Bobby at the mall about his cemetery visits, claiming that Bobby refusing to pay the funeral bill is a morbid clanging and that she wants to have a day where they can talk about her and not his stupid dead wife. And Bobby rightfully tells Janice to shut the fuck up as she leaves. Svetlana calls Tony at his house thanking him for the jewelry, the same jewelry that Valentina rejected. And while Tony offers to keep it going, Svetlana says that she doesn't want anything else from Tony and hangs up. Tony talks about this brief fling with Svetlana with Melfi, and makes an absolutely insane Freudian slip.
You know, but after a while, I felt like I had to cut off the leg.
Whoops!
Not leg, affair. Did I say leg?
Tony admits to Melfi that Svetlana broke up with him and not the other way around, claiming that Svetlana called him high maintenance and that no real change has been made to his character from therapy. Melfi asks if Tony is no longer interested in changing himself, and Tony says that he believes he isn't, once again saying therapy's gotten him nowhere, and talking about what Svetlana said last episode about Americans being too self-centered, says they don't have to face issues that other countries face. While Melfi says that this is a good thing, saying that their advancements allow them to explore their own deeper psychological issues, such as, for example, Tony's, Tony still believes that his time in therapy is up. He says that nobody gives him any appreciation for the amount of time he's put into therapy. And while Melfi commends his courage and tells him to come to one last appointment, Tony still says he wants out, thanking Melfi for the help she gave him with his depression and panic attacks. He gives Melfi a kiss on the cheek before walking out the doors, and Melfi later calls Elliot, informing him of this recent development.
Well, guess who's no longer a patient of mine? Calling all cars.
Janice instant messages Bobby Jr. while he plays GoldenEye under the pseudonym Vlad666, and instructs Bobby Jr. to a place in the home, which directs him and Sophia to another Ouija board. Tony drives into Miami to meet with Beansy, and the judge of the Rico case deems Jr. fit to stand trial despite Jr.'s efforts to come across like a crazy person. Bobby later talks with Janice at his place, saying that the kids were trying to contact Karen through the Ouija board again, and Janice is like, "Oh no, that's so sad." He talks about how scared they become, Sophia especially, and Janice claims that she overheard them using the board earlier that day, but that she didn't want to overstep her bounds after their argument from earlier. Bobby blames himself for his children's yearning to contact their mother, as manipulative Janice says that Bobby's just under a lot of stress, and says that there's no use grieving for Karen since the dead can't talk to the living.
Go ahead.
It's just, the dead have nothing to say to us, Bobby. It's our own narcissism that makes us think they even care.
I fucking hate you, Janice. Janice decides to push Bobby over the edge and moving on from Karen by pulling out that last ziti she baked out of the freezer to eat for dinner, which Bobby agrees to as a tear rolls down his cheek. Tony talks with little Carmine about the issue with the Lupertazzi family and the HUD scam deal, with Tony saying that he feels disrespected by the lack of a counteroffer. Little Carmine mispronounces Versailles as Versailles, which is definitely not an outlier. And Tony talks about Carmine trying to reach out to Maurice, as well as his appraiser getting beat up by New York's crew, even though Tony also had his crew beat him up, saying that more severe actions will be taken if an agreement isn't reached soon. Bobby and Janice eat Karen's last ziti together, with Janice not feeling a shred of guilt for a moment, and we're given another dream sequence, which opens up with Ralphie directing Tony into a house. Tony walks up to the house in this strange outfit and says that he's here to work a masoner job, and a tall, dark figure walks down the stairs as Tony speaks to it in Italian, apologizing for not being able to speak English despite just doing so a moment ago.
Me no. Speak English.
Despite the creepiness of this figure, Tony walks inside, and the real Tony suddenly jolts awake from the dream. This sequence has got to be one of the most intriguing out of all of Tony's dreams. It doesn't have nearly as many details to pick apart and dissect, but what it does offer is still very fascinating. I strongly believe that the dark, shadowy figure in this dream is meant to represent Livia, as Tony's described Livia in the past as a bottomless black hole, among other things.
That fucking selfish, miserable
Along with the fact that the figure has a very motherly shape, for lack of a better term. Tony suddenly being unable to speak English and speaking Italian also draws back to his family's Italian roots, and his confusion could possibly represent the mixed feelings that Tony has when thinking about his mother. One moment of the show, Tony's ranting about how miserable she is, and the next moment he's flipping over tables over the mere criticism of his mother. This sequence reminds me a lot of the one from Isabella, where Tony fantasized about Isabella taking care of him as a little baby while speaking Italian. Both of them deal with Tony's deep psychological issues with Livia and how they affect him more than he'd like to admit. All this being said, however, I'm not entirely sure why Ralphie of all people is the one leading Tony to Livia's place. I've seen some people speculate that it all ties back to the Ralphie is the actual devil theory, and that Ralphie is leading Tony into his own personal hell, which does kind of make sense. Livia said that the whole world is a big nothing, and the figure Tony stares at is surrounded by darkness, only illuminated by a couple of lights. If we're going off of my interpretation from the previous stream in this episode, Ralphie could represent the ongoing change occurring in Tony's life regarding him quitting his weekly meetings with Melfi. Melfi was the person who was able to guide Tony through the trauma he faced with his mother, and now that she's gone, he's left to fend with his own confusion and anger, which may explain why he wakes up from the dream in a cold sweat. Hey, speaking of which, Tony wakes up from the dream in a cold sweat, and goes into the hotel bathroom, illuminated by this really creepy bright red light. And he walks to the deck to a really nice view of Miami. And Surfing USA plays in the background as the show fades to black, ending the episode. This was a pretty great episode. My personal highlights of this episode are, unsurprisingly, the dream sequences at the beginning and the ending. And watching Tony and Melfi go back and forth as Tony becomes less convinced by Melfi's abilities was very fun to see. Janice really fucking pissed me off this episode. Like, look, I understand that we all have to move on at some point, even after something as emotionally intense as losing your wife in a car accident. But watching Janice emotionally manipulate Bobby and his children so that they move on from Karen just makes me mad. Instead of talking with Bobby and helping him naturally move on from this traumatic experience, she's like, boo hoo hoo, she's dead, get over it. And then when that doesn't work, she exploits his children's curiosity of the supernatural by leading them to a Ouija board to guilt trip Bobby even more. What a dick. Janice literally cannot wait to have Bobby as her own, so she essentially forces Bobby and his children to speedrun the grieving process. That dinner scene with Bobby and Janice eating Karen's last ziti is especially fucked up because Janice doesn't feel an ounce of guilt for any of this. Junior had a point, man. Okay, anyways, this episode was very good. I might hate Janice, but Aida Turturro did a great job in this episode. AJ fucking around with Bobby's kids was also really entertaining, and also Beansy's back, yippee! I'm feeling a nice A tier for this one. Season 4, Episode 12, Eloise. Junior gets roasted by the prosecution during his case, with Bobby staring at one juror in particular, and AJ reads out an essay to Carm before being interrupted by Furio, who Carm happily welcomes inside. He mentions some issues with his mother's apartment that Carm offers to help with, and Carm offers some homemade scones to Furio, which Furio declines while Tony helps himself to them, making Carm less than pleased. Tony surprises Carm with a 3-day vacation and dances with her while Furio awkwardly averts his eyes, and Carm tries listing excuses for them not to go, while Tony says she deserves a break, theorizing that stress is the reason she cut her hair short. Tony complains to Furio about Carm not wanting to vacation with Tony and calls her a moody bitch, which secretly pisses off Furio. And Johnny Sack meets little Carmine at the golf course, where they talk about this debacle.
Total debacle.
Debacle with Tony. He talks to his father Carmine about the HUD negotiation, saying that his stubborn insistence on the 40% cut is backing himself into a corner, with Johnny Sack even admitting that that's a bit steep. Carmine says that Tony is an egoistic hardhead and describes the Sopranos as a glorified crew. But Johnny says that they bring in loads of cash either way and that he's known Tony for years, which little Carmine says might be the sticking post, probably meaning the term sticking point, saying that Tony might see them more as friends rather than business associates, which less describes Tony and more accurately describes stupid Paulie.
See? What am I always saying? I hate this fucking shit.
Carmela looks around Furio's new garage, and Carm pitches some romantic suggestions for decorations from a book. And Furio thanks Carm for her help as the two stare at each other for a brief moment. But Furio's uncle Zio barges in before any battleship takes place. Carmela decides to set up a date for her and Furio to look around for ceramic tiles. And Cookie, Minnie, and Nucci fool around a little too hard, looking around for a handicapped parking spot at Bingo.
Oh my God! Jesus, Mary and Joseph!
Jesus Christ, lady, didn't you see me?
The second time in the series where an old lady nearly kills someone with her car. Tony hangs out at the casino and tells Silvio that Johnny Sack wants to have a sit-down tomorrow night to discuss the scam. And Silvio gets going while Tony drunkenly dances with his random lady while Furio refuses to do the same, staring at Tony angrily for dancing with some other lady while he's got a wife and kids at home, even though he also wants to fuck said wife. Paulie visits Nucci at the hospital and offers to drive Nucci and her friends since Minnie's eyesight sucks. And Carmela visits Meadow's new apartment that she's sharing with some friends, with Meadow briefly talking about her new boyfriend Finn and how he hasn't said I love you to her yet. Tony and the other guys drunkenly make their way from the casino to a helicopter, and Tony and Furio go to piss extremely close to the spinning blades. Furio realizes that he's been given the perfect opportunity to use his uncle's advice of only being able to have Carmela if Tony is killed, and nearly pushes a drunken Tony into the blades.
What the fuck you doing?
I'm standing too close.
Tony looks back at the blades in shock before getting into the helicopter, as Furio sadly looks out the window before takeoff. Tony wakes up the next morning hungover, asking where Furio is as Carm says that he's 40 minutes late. He goes back upstairs and tells Carm not to wake him if Furio does arrive, and Carm calls Furio's number, with no luck. The phone immediately starts ringing again, but Carm's disappointed to find out that it's only Meadow, who invites the family to come over to her apartment for dinner. Carm drives over to Furio's place, the garage still unfinished, and drives off, concerned about Furio's whereabouts. Tony and Silvio head to the sit-down with Johnny at Carmine's new restaurant, who tells Tony that Carmine still wants 40% of the HUD scam intake, but on future deals only, which Tony says is exactly the fucking same as last week. He complains that little Carmine did nothing to help this before storming out of there with Silvio. And Carmela finds out from her friend Darlene that Furio's houses went for sale on the market, which devastates Carm as she rushes over to check inside the now empty house in this really cool zoom out shot. You can really feel Carmela's heart sink as she realizes that the man she truly loved has just suddenly vanished. Carm later learns from Tony when getting ready for Meadows' dinner that Furio moved back to Italy out of nowhere, saddening Carmela further. The family meets the previously mentioned Finn DiTrolio, who's hoping to become a dentist later in life, as well as Meadows' other roommates, Colin and Alex, with Tony relieved that Finn lives in a different apartment from them. We learn that Finn's father was in the Navy as a surgeon and that Finn was initially born in Japan, and Carm refuses some of Meadows' food, likely not hungry from finding out that her star-crossed lover just crossed over the border back to Naples. The show suddenly cuts to little Paulie and some of Tony's other guys vandalizing Carmine's new restaurant for not agreeing to a stronger compromise, and we come back to Meadows' dinner, where they talk about skiing and Alex being descended from Spanish royalty, and AJ switches the subject over to him getting a C on the paper he was reading last episode. The topic was of a book called Billy Budd, which Meadow and her friends say contains themes of homosexuality, and Carmela talks about how gay people are gross and icky and how gayness is pervading the educational system and the media, with Tony noticeably indifferent to all of this. Carmela continues making everyone uncomfortable as Carmine looks at the damage to his restaurant the next day, and Paulie complains about Tony sending out little Paulie without his permission. And Silvio tells Paulie that his attitude has been bothering everyone these past few weeks, especially Tony. But Paulie insists that all friendships have peaks and valleys and that his current friendship with Tony is in a valley. Paulie blames Silvio for this recent downturn, claiming that he and Chris's incident with the Russian and Pine Barren stemmed from Paulie stepping in for Silvio in his sickness. And Silvio tells Paulie to accept some responsibility for once in his fucking life as the two nearly fight and Paulie angrily walks out the door. Johnny talks to Carmine about the recent vandalism, saying action needs to be taken against Tony. And Carmine tells Johnny to call the union as we cut to Carmela having dinner at Vesuvio with Rosalie, talking about her sadness from Furio leaving and that they were supposed to go on a date to pick out tiles. Rosalie tells Carm that she'll forget about him in a couple months and theorizes if Tony said something to Furio before Carm rushes to the bathroom crying. Paulie has dinner with Nucci and the gals, and they stuff every single goddamn thing at the table into their doggy bags before Minnie realizes that she needs to break a $100 bill, with Cookie mentioning that Minnie still keeps her money under the mattress. Paulie gets pissed at Minnie for stealing Nucci's bread rolls, and they hilariously look absolutely enraged at each other as the show cuts to the construction site, where agents barge onto the scene with a giant inflatable rat for some reason and shut down the property due to a claim of non-union workers hired on the site. Later, Gene Pontecorvo locates the juror at the trial that Bobby was staring at earlier, and subtly threatens him to do the right thing while paying for his stuff before walking away. Carmelo cries in the bathroom at the prospect of losing Furio, and answers a call from Meadow, who asks if she did something to piss off Carmela at dinner the other night before asking if she'd like to do their usual tradition of going out to the plaza to eat dinner and drink tea, the same tradition mentioned all the way back to the pilot episode. Carmela agrees to this through tears, pretending she's crying because she's happy about this request. And Tony, Silvio, and Vito talk about Johnny and Carmine shutting down the Esplanade, with Vito mentioning that the agent was just someone from the union that Johnny and Carmine own. Tony decides not to counteract, saying that both families will end up losing money on this. And Meadow and Carm eat together by Eloise, the titular painting of this episode. Carmela acts passive-aggressive to Meadow, still pissed about Furio along with a Billy Budd thing. And Meadow says she's gonna do laundry at their place the night before Finn picks her up for a skiing trip. Carm immediately assumes that Finn's gonna stay over, which Meadow says isn't the case, as she asks what Carm has against love, which is some really funny timing. The two get into an argument, with Meadow asking why Carm's treating her like a child, while Carm says that she is a child despite her recent accomplishments. And Meadow roasts Carm for dropping out of college, while Carm roasts Meadow for always needing money. I gotta say, I'm on Meadow's side with this whole argument. Carm is just being a dick and taking her anger out on Meadow, despite Meadow just wanting to do something nice with her. Paulie spots Carmine at the wedding and talks to him about the conflict with him and Tony, and realizes that Carmine has absolutely no idea who Paulie is, asking if Johnny ever talked to Carmine about him, which Carmine says never happened. Paulie stumbles into the bathroom shocked that people who kill other people for money aren't friendly. And Carm receives a postcard of the Roman Colosseum, though becomes disappointed realizing it's only a haircut ad and not a message from Furio. Tony chews as loud as humanly fucking possible while Carm talks to Tony about the shit show dinner she had with Meadow, mentioning that Meadow threatened to transfer to a college closer to Finn and farther from her parents, and claims that she'd be fine if she never saw Meadow again, which Tony points out is an insane thing to say about your own daughter. Carm claims that she's acting like an ass because of physical complications, as Tony says that he has his own issues to deal with, like Furio moving back to Naples, an issue that Tony doesn't quite realize is affecting Carmela just as much as him. Meadow later asks AJ what's up with Carmela, and AJ theorized that it might have to do with Furio's dad dying, mentioning that she took him over there 3 separate times, and Meadow has barely any time to think about the implications of this discovery before AJ shits his pants in front of her. Meanwhile, Paulie sneaks over to Minnie's house to steal her aforementioned cash from under the mattress, when Minnie spots him, and Paulie tries to play it off before Minnie immediately goes to tattletale on Paulie's mother. The situation quickly escalates as Minnie says Paulie's here to rob him and kicks him in the crotch while screaming, "Help!" Minnie says that Paulie was always a little bastard before he chokeslams her onto the ground and suffocates her with a pillow when it's simultaneously one of the funniest and most disturbing deaths in the entire show. The way that the show goes from her hilarious "oh no" to revealing her glazed over eyes makes me feel an emotion that I can't quite describe. It's such a funny death scene, but the show doesn't waste this opportunity to remind the audience that what Paulie just did is not good, even though Minnie totally deserved it, just saying. Paulie later gives the stolen money to Tony as a way to make up for his debts, and Tony smiles at Paulie as he leaves, though not before pressing his ear up against the door to listen to a phone call from Johnny Sack. Tony learns that Carm didn't even say goodbye to Meadow before her trip, and tells Meadow that Carm still loves her and that she's just going through a rough time. He mentions that they talked about this in therapy, which shocks Meadow since she surprisingly never learned about that up to this point in the show, and Tony theorizes that she might be going through menopause. Meadow asks Tony if that's really what's going on, thinking about what AJ said earlier about her visiting Furio's place often, but decides not to spill the beans and says that it's probably just menopause. Later that night, Tony meets Johnny Sack in his car, who admits to Tony that he wished Carmine wouldn't be such a stubborn ass since his choices end up costing him money as well. Tony asks why Johnny's telling him this, as Johnny says he knows that Tony is a pragmatist, which is interestingly the same term that little Carmine described Johnny as, and says that Carmine is not going to budge, and very subtly implies to Tony that things would be much better if Carmine somehow died, wink wink wink, and tells Tony to call him soon before leaving.
Holy shit.
Carm watches a movie as Tony gets ready for bed, who mentions his conversation with Meadow earlier. And while Carm says she hates her guts, Tony assures her otherwise, saying that Meadow is growing up to be a very smart, independent woman, asking isn't that what Carm always wanted, which Carm very enthusiastically replies yes to.
Yes.
Ending the episode. This episode is actually a lot better than I remember it being. We get more of the always amazing little Carmine and his consistent malapropisms, or using a word that sounds like another word in replacement of the actual word you meant to say on accident. A lot of fictional works use this technique for comedic relief characters like Dogberry and Much Ado About Nothing, and it works wonders here. Were you expecting a Shakespeare reference in your Sopranos retrospective? Neither was I. What I especially love about little Carmine is the way that he delivers all of his sentences with complete confidence, even if he says something that's not even remotely correct. It's like he's not smart, but he's also not stupid either. It's really weird. He can actually give good advice and can read the room and all that. Paulie's material in this episode is especially hilarious as he comes to the crushing realization that the people who work in the Mafia don't care about him nearly as much as he'd like to believe. Ever since the Pine Barrens episode, Paulie's become this almost incompetent buffoon constantly causing trouble, which I personally believe is for the best. His naivete, along with a performance by Tony Sirico, makes for such an entertaining character to watch, especially when he's beefing with old ladies and killing them. To think that none of that would have happened if Minnie just kept her hands off those goddamn bread rolls. The star of this episode, though, has gotta be Carmela, with the fallout of Furio suddenly moving back to Naples without a trace. Edie Falco's acting in this episode is pretty spectacular as Carm starts taking out all of her anger and frustration on every member of the family, even pulling Olivia near the end of the episode by proclaiming that Meadow hates her. It's interesting because on the one hand, you totally understand where she's coming from and might have even wanted Furio to push Tony into the blade so they could get together. But on the other hand, she becomes such a huge dick to everyone around her, especially Meadow. You understand Furio being pissed off at Tony for calling her a moody bitch, but then, like, she becomes a moody bitch, even though you understand why she's a moody bitch. This is the best show ever. Furio's sudden disappearance is such a tragic moment for Carmela, as he left without even giving as much as a goodbye to her, though realistically this was probably for the best. If I was in the mob and nearly killed my boss so I could fuck his wife, I'd probably want to get the fuck out of there before any evidence started piling up. In the end, I think Furio made the right decision to just say screw it and go back to Italy. He was way too good for the Soprano family anyway. They were a glorified crew. Sadly, this is the final episode of the series that Furio appears in, which is very unfortunate. Furio is up there as one of my favorite Sopranos characters. A true Italian-American hero. We should change Columbus Day to Furio Day. That way the show can dedicate an episode about it while doing fucking nothing with the characters. Okay, anyways, this episode is pretty great. I am feeling a very strong ace here on this one. Alright, the season finales for the show have been pretty great so far, but with season 4's variety and quality, I don't know if it can stick the landing. What's the next episode again? Oh, it's just the best episode of the history of television, that's all. Tony sits at a doctor's appointment with Carm while Chris finally gets out of rehab, with Patsy noticing Harris and another FBI guy spying on him. Dr. Cusimano informs Carm that she doesn't have any major diseases and asks if her stress has been off the charts lately because of something like a death or a major change in her life, and Carm's like, no, I don't think so. Tony fools around over to a special place with Carmelo while Johnny informs Ginny that they may not be able to go to a vacation in Italy due to him losing tons of money on the Esplanade. Tony pulls up to a house that's going up for sale called Whitecaps, which shocks Carm. And while Carm says that the house is very expensive and that the Esplanade's not bringing in a ton of cash, Tony insists on purchasing it, saying that it would be perfect for the family. Back at Junior's trial, the jurors become unable to reach a verdict, and the judge gives them more time to deliberate as the juror that Gene intimidated last episode looks frightened, with Junior staring at him from afar. Carm tells Tony that purchasing the Whitecaps home would not be a wise financial decision as Tony complains that they screwed up his Chinese order, and AJ says that buying the house would be sick as we cut to Tony and Carm in bed later that night, with Carm reconsidering purchasing the home due to its value, along with the fact that Tony would be a moody bitch if they didn't get the house. Chris talks to Tony about how rehab was a success, thanking everyone for forcing him to go, and Johnny informs Tony that Carmine's still being as stubborn as a mule with the Esplanade situation. They very subtly discuss the hit on Carmine, with Johnny informing Tony that it'd be better if it was an outside job rather than someone near the bottom of the mafia hierarchy, and Tony says that he won't deal with it unless Johnny allows him to keep any and all profits from the HUD scam, along with a 60-40 split in his favor on all future construction projects, which Johnny reluctantly agrees to. Tony informs Chris of this future hit on Carmine, saying that Johnny doesn't have many other income streams and that Johnny still holds resentment toward Carmine for not letting him kill Ralphie for the fat joke. He says that they need to make it look like an outside force caused his death as Chris pitches the idea of hiring 2 drug dealers that he knows of. And Tony talks to Alan, a lawyer who owns the house that Tony's looking to buy. Tony offers to pay for the house in cash as soon as possible, an offer that Alan eventually takes up as Carm receives a call later that day confirming the purchase. Tony takes Carm and AJ to check out the brand new house as Meadow and Finn pull up to the house as well, with everyone in awe of how friggin' sweet it is. Tony and Carm walk across the beach and kiss each other in this really beautiful shot, with Carm saying that Tony is full of surprises. And Chris talks with the 2 drug dealers, telling them to make it look like a carjacking gone wrong. You know, everything in this episode so far has just been peachy keen. Chris is recovering thanks to rehab, Johnny and Tony are about to get their profits back on the Esplanade, and Tony just made everyone in the family ecstatic by this new purchase. And if I recall correctly, that's how it's gonna be this whole episode. Nothing but good times and happy days ahead. The phone in the Soprano household starts ringing as AJ picks it up, and it turns out to be Irina of all people, who drunkenly asks AJ to transfer the call to Carmela, and when Carmela picks up, Irina immediately opens the conversation by saying she was one of Tony's Gulmars, and Carm quickly hangs up the phone, sick to her stomach. The phone starts ringing again as Carm picks it up once more, and Irina tells Carmela that the feeling of sadness is mutual between the two of them, revealing to Carm that Tony has been sleeping with Svetlana while she took care of Junior. Irina tells Carm to imagine where she is on the pecking order of Tony's love as Carm threatens to kill Irina if she ever calls the house again, and Irina refreshes Carm's memory of Svetlana, reminding her that she was the woman with one leg who took care of Livia before she passed away, and Carmela hangs up the phone, horrified. After all this time of Carm trying to come to terms with the feelings of betrayal, sadness, and anger regarding Tony's past affairs, that mental wound has been suddenly and forcefully ripped open. This, combined with a man that she truly loved up and leaving back to his hometown without so much as a goodbye, causes Carmela to snap. Tony pulls up to the house whistling to Layla, oblivious to what's about to happen next as he runs over his golf clubs, and notices Carm throwing his stuff out of the window. When he barges inside, she yells at Tony to stay the hell away from her while she locks herself in her room. While Tony believes this anger is simply because of a conversation he had with Carm's parents, Carm opens up the door and scolds Tony for continuing to have affairs behind her back, mentioning the phone call Irina made to their house. Tony starts sweating profusely while desperately trying to convince Carmela that Irina is lying, but Carmela sees through this deception and furiously confronts Tony about his relationship with Svetlana.
There is not a shred of truth in that.
Why would the cousin make it up? Because she's jealous! Why do you fuck? Let go of me!
Tony realizes the severity of his situation as Carmela cries in her room, slapping Tony's hand off her shoulder and telling him to never touch her again. She says that Tony has betrayed her trust so many times in the past as Tony tries to out-guilty her, accusing Carmela of stealing 40 grand from the birdseed. But Carmela brushes this off and demands Tony to leave the house, bringing up the fingernail from Tony's clothes that she found while folding laundry and that she knows he saw on his nightstand. Tony tries defending himself in this accusation and nearly reveals that the fingernail came from Valentina, but catches himself.
That... What? That what?
Nothing. Nothing.
Carmela asks Tony through tears what Svetlana has that she doesn't have. A simple yet powerful question that Tony has no answer to. He swears that he didn't have an affair with Svetlana as Carmela begs Tony to just get out of the house and leave her alone, acknowledging the impact this will have on the kids as Tony leaves Carmela in her room to cry. It's not often that James Gandolfini gets outshined by other actors in The Sopranos, but the performance that Edie Falco gives in this episode is quite possibly some of the best acting that I have ever seen, point blank period. Her mixture of rage, betrayal, anger, and sadness is so raw and frighteningly realistic. At points, it doesn't even feel like I'm watching a TV show. It feels as if we've been given this uncomfortably intimate glance into the worst moment of two people's lives. James Gandolfini's performance is also incredible too, as we're given a side of Tony that we rarely, if ever, get to see. Tony has proved himself to be an excellent leader in times of hardship with his crew, able to overcome difficult situations through various means. But what Tony's facing in this scene can't be solved through bribery, murder, or lies, and we're given these scarce moments where Tony's at a loss for words, unable to defend himself, and at points even almost outing his other misdeeds to Carmela. These two incredible actors give what I believe is the performance of a lifetime, as Tony's previously unknown relationships are finally revealed to Carmela. And the interesting thing about this scene is that Tony isn't even technically lying about not being in a relationship with Svetlana, as it was only a one-time fling rather than a full-blown relationship. At the end of the day, however, the finer details of the situation mean nothing. Any way you slice it, Tony still cheated on Carr multiple times behind her back. And those misdeeds have finally come back to bite Tony in the ass in a way that he prayed would never happen. Neither character is truly in the right in this situation, however. Carm had been warned in the past to get the hell out of this relationship with Tony, but Carm stayed regardless, able to repress her guilty conscience of the people Tony's hurt to pay for the roof over her head. And the only reason she wants him out of her life now is because she herself has been hurt by his actions. It's this complex, violent eruption of emotions that both characters spew at one another. And the way that the show has been slowly but surely stacking up all these little details pays off incredibly here. It's why TV shows have the potential to be so amazing. They're given more time to develop the characters and the story they live through, which gives them the opportunity to slowly build up to an explosive climax, should the writers, actors, and crew members actually give a shit. And in the case of The Sopranos, they absolutely did. We're not even half an hour into this episode, and I'm already praising it like the episode is finished already. Let's move on before I get way too ahead of myself. Tony storms over to Irina's place as Svetlana answers the door instead, telling Tony that Zellman broke up with Irina after getting whipped with a belt by Tony, saying he felt weak in front of Irina and wasn't able to play Battleship with her, leading Irina to take her revenge by fucking up Tony's relationship. Tony admits that he shouldn't have been drinking that day, while Svetlana coldly says that his kids won't trust him after the divorce, but gives Tony some sympathy and that he'll get through this before leaving. Tony brings his shit over to the Whitecaps house to sleep for the night, and Adriana talks with San Severino, saying that Chris is feeling better and how he feels like he shouldn't have children after accidentally suffocating little Cassette, which is so unfair. Little Cassette just crawled under there for warmth. Chris has been framed. Adriana talks about Tony purchasing a new house and that Ralphie hasn't been heard from lately, mentioning that Chris wants to help him when he reattaches his limbs back together, I mean when he resurfaces. She also mentions Vito potentially hitting on her while Chris was away and how Chris would kill him if he found out, quickly catching herself and saying that her made man boyfriend in the mafia wouldn't actually kill someone. And Alan wakes Tony up from a comfy night of pre-divorce sleep, where Alan gives Tony some legal advice before Tony gets ready for the day. Tony goes over to Alan's house and tells him and his wife that he no longer wants to purchase the Whitecaps house since he bought it for his wife and kids, which, haha, whoopsie, but Alan doesn't allow this, saying the house has been on the market for over a year and that they don't want to go through that trouble of selling again, Tony's crumbling marriage notwithstanding. Johnny delivers the shocking news to Tony over the phone that Carmine actually wants to settle, forcing Tony to call off the hit extremely last minute. Tony and Chris meet with Carmine and Johnny at the park, and Carmine finally bends the knee and offers a 20% cut. And when Tony counteroffers with a 15% cut, Carmine goes fuck it, why not, and agrees to a 15% cut for the HUD scam. Yay. Meadow talks with Carmela about this whole situation, sadly saying that she always envisioned everyone in the family being happy and together for the holidays when she eventually started up a family with Finn. Meadow throws a curveball at Carm and asks if the divorce was caused by Furio, but Carm denies this, saying that she's never been unfaithful to Tony, which is technically true, but not really. Meadow asks how Carm could have ever put up with Tony's behavior for so long before running upstairs crying. Artie gives his condolences to Tony of Vesuvio, and Tony responds by complaining about the food as he gets a call from Johnny, saying how amazing it is that they finally came to a deal. And Tony interestingly repeats a quote that Carm imparted on him before they purchased the Whitecaps home.
More is lost by indecision than wrong decision.
More is lost by indecision than by wrong decision, that's all I'm saying.
Tony tells the crew that him and Carmine were able to make a deal, and receives a call from Alan, saying they'll let him go from the house but that they're keeping his deposit of $200,000, and offers a negotiation, which Tony declines. Tony Five Nights at Freddy's jump scares Carm, and Carm prevents him from getting any food from the fridge, demanding that he leave right now. Tony gives a limp dick apology to Carm as Carm tells him once more to leave, and the two start fighting each other as Carm asks if AJ wants to see them like this.
I'm not leaving here, Carmela.
I don't love you anymore. I don't want you. You are not sleeping in my bed, Tony. The thought of it now makes me sick.
Tony once again opens up the fridge as Carmela runs to her room in hysterics, and AJ helps Tony move stuff out of the movie theater room, with Tony telling him to be extra respectful to Carmela. He sets up the air mattress in the room and later calls Chris that night to call off the hit, saying that nobody can know that the hit was even considered as Adriana looks over concerned. Chris later meets with the drug dealers to call off the hit, and allows them to go home and live happily ever after. Tony decides to relax in the swimming pool, much to Carmela's dismay, and she tells Tony that she wants him to move the movie theater seats out to the garage so she can turn the sprinklers on. Tony says that's boring and pisses in the pools. Carm asks why he has to make even this so difficult, and Tony says she just came out here to bust his balls before leaving the pool. Carm tells Tony that she would have gone on with all of Tony's bullshit if he was at least loving or caring to her, saying that Whitecaps was just another version of a diamond ring to keep on with his other lives. Carm claims that she knows Tony better than anyone else and that that's probably the reason why he hates her. But Tony says that he's going to hell when he dies, reminding Carm that she once told that to him when he was placed in an MRI all the way back in the pilot episode. Carm apologizes to Tony in the theater room for saying that to him, finally reflecting on how much Tony meant to her years ago. But Tony rejects this reflection and angrily asks Carm why she didn't expect Tony to cheat on her since he's a mafia guy, like that excuses it. He claims that she knew the deal, and also mentions Carm's mother always bringing up the former boyfriend running a chain of drugstores, a detail brought up back in season 3, and claims that they both know that his lifestyle wouldn't have suited Carmela. Carm dismisses this and says that it's not just about things with her, calling Tony a hateful person, and drops the fucking fat man atomic bomb on Tony and reveals that, over the course of the past year, she had been madly in love with Furio, describing how she'd look forward to his visits to the house every night and every day.
He would smile, and we'd talk, and then you would come down the stairs, and then it all comes back.
Tony gives a very Livia-like poor you before bringing up Carmela's earlier question of what does she have that I don't have. And he says that he feels like Svetlana actually has something to say and how she struggled through life, supposedly unlike Carmela. But Carmela brings up the dozens of other women Tony hooked up with over the years, asking if Tony had close relationships with them too before calling him a hypocrite and leaving the room. The judge calls Junior and his people back into the courtroom while Tony calls Melfi's office, but he quickly hangs up, and Melfi tries to call Tony's number back before realizing that the number has her blocked. Thanks to the threats made to that one particular juror, the jury at Junior's trial are at a permanent standstill, and the judge finally declares a mistrial, which Junior and the rest of the guys celebrate. AJ asks Tony if he can move into the theater room with Tony since Carm is always on his case, but Tony says nuh-uh, saying that it'll hurt his mother's feelings, and AJ mentions that he overheard him telling Carm off by the pool earlier, which makes Tony feel a bit guilty while little Polly borrows some of Tony's speakers. Janice proposes holding a party to celebrate the mistrial, but Junior says that they should settle down, mentioning that Tony's probably too busy to come down to celebrate. Janice and Bobby are noticeably more playful with each other, which disturbs Junior greatly as he tells Bobby to do him a favor, much to Janice's annoyance. Little Polly and Benny Fazio use the borrowed speakers to bother the fuck out of lawyer Allen and his friends, blasting a Dean Martin record off the Stu Gods right next to his house. Tony meets Johnny Sack, saying that he was busy interviewing divorce lawyers, and informs him that he's no longer pulling the hit on Carmine, saying that the feds are gonna notice blood in the water, as well as the fact that Carmine's an old man already. Johnny loudly complains about taking orders from Carmine and stupid little Carmine before Tony tells Johnny that he can still whack Carmine if he wants. But Johnny asks if they're just supposed to go back to the Esplanade and act like nothing happened, and Tony's like, yeah. Johnny gets pissed before Tony tells him that he still considers the two of them as friends, and they hug it out as Tony heads back home to Carmela preparing dinner. He informs Carm, AJ, and Meadow that he's decided to move out of the house for good, and he comforts AJ and Meadow before packing his belongings. We get this very brief but powerful moment of Meadow crying in her room, reliving a moment where she complained to Tony and Carm about there being nothing to eat in the house, expressing guilt for not appreciating the good that she had. Carmela tells Tony to be careful as Tony collects his things, and Carm and AJ watch him leave the house. Despite all the sadness sadness and the anger that this episode is shown, things end off on a really funny note as Alan and his wife notice the Stugatz still docked outside their house. And they keep blasting the Dean Martin record off the speakers as Alan threatens to call the cops again. To which Alan's wife notes that they'll just turn down the speakers when they arrive. She yells at Alan to give Tony his money back as she storms inside. And Alan goes back inside as well as the record just keeps on playing, ending the season. When I first watched this show, Whitecaps was easily one of my all-time favorite episodes, both from The Sopranos and of any TV show that I've watched. Going back to when I first began this series, I had a strong feeling that this episode was just going to sweep every other episode from the show in my eyes. However, after finally getting to this episode through the end, I gotta say, it's still my favorite episode. Whitecaps is by far the longest episode of The Sopranos, clocking it at a whopping 75 minutes. And that longer than average runtime isn't just there for shits and giggles. This episode doesn't waste a single second, delivering some of the most emotionally intense moments of any episode of the series, while also wrapping up several loose ends of the season in a nice little Dean Martin-shaped bow. Despite being the only Sopranos season finale where nobody dies or gets murdered, okay, well, nobody significant to the story at least, it is easily one of the most intense and impactful episodes, gifting the audience with some of the greatest performances in television history at the hands of Edie Falco and James Gandolfini. Everyone else in this episode is fantastic as well, but mother of God, do these two just steal the show. All of the little details that had been given to the audience, as well as the character development with Carmela and Tony even since the beginning of the show, feel like the fuse that had been leading up to this gigantic explosion in retrospect. This is easily one of the most pivotal episodes of the show, and the showrunners definitely knew this, because not a single moment or opportunity was wasted. Carmela and Furio's will they won't they relationship this season pays off beautifully in this episode. That moment when Carmela finally spills her guts to Tony about her secret fantasies still gets my heart racing even on rewatch. Not in that way, I mean like it's an intense moment. Tony nearly kills her. Throughout this season, Carmela and Tony had gone on these separate personal journeys regarding love and their relationships to other people. With Carmela, of course, battling with her love of Furio, along with the guilt she feels for being willfully ignorant of Tony's terrible sins. And Tony dealing with the grief and guilt of losing Gloria and even Irina to an extent, along with hooking up with Valentina and Svetlana. Carm and Tony's internal battles this season have all been building up to this explosive climax, resulting in one of the most incredible scenes in all of The Sopranos, which is saying a lot because The Sopranos is an already incredible show. That being said, Carm and Tony's struggles are, of course, not the only great thing about this episode. The show teases the audience with the murder of Carmine, only to subvert everyone's expectations at the last second. And the Whitecaps plotline and Tony dealing with stupid lawyer Alan was very fun to watch. The actor's line delivery of this character really rubs me the wrong way, though I'm sure that's intentional. And watching him deal with Tony being a prick is extremely funny. Whitecaps is easily one of the best written episodes of The Sopranos, not just because it's the longest, though that certainly gives it a boost, but because of what it does with that runtime. While the scenes with Tony and Carm are what pushed this episode to his legendary status, this episode has a hell of a lot more to offer than just that, containing exciting action, great humor, top-tier writing, and exceptional acting across the board, which is why I am giving this episode a strong double S tier, an unbelievable end to a great season. Season 4 of The Sopranos is one of the most baffling seasons of television I've ever covered on this channel. How is it possible that this season can contain both the worst episode of the show along with one of the best episodes of television ever? While this season contained a lot of relatively middle-of-the-road episodes, it more than makes up for that with some of the best and most memorable moments of the entire series. The writing of The Sopranos never diminishes in quality, even in its much weaker episodes. And we're given some very interesting and exciting developments throughout, with the death of Ralphie, the death of Tony and Carm's marriage, and the death of Bobby's happiness as Jana starts invading his life. As much as I hated Ralphie, I'm gonna miss that guy a lot going into season 5. He sucked, but he was awesome. Will The Sopranos increase in quality going into season 5, or will we get 13 straight episodes akin to Christopher? There's only one way to find out, and that's by joining me in the next installment of The Sopranos Ranked and Reviewed series. While I make these, in the meantime, I highly suggest watching the show yourself if you somehow haven't already. It's literally some of the best television you'll ever watch if my constant adoration of the series hasn't tipped you off yet. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in season 5. Take care.